The city was restless, the kind of restlessness that came before a storm. A city breathing in, holding itself on the edge of something dreadful and wondrous. King's Landing's tangled streets were quieter than they had been in weeks. The bells of the great sept silent. The whispers traveling from wine sink to brothel, from market stall to the high halls of the Red Keep, like feverish wind through dying grass. Arya Stark moved through this web, almost invisible, almost forgotten, but never unremarked by those who mattered. She had become a rumor herself, a girl with a face nobody could quite remember, a shadow who glided between the worlds of lords and small folk alike. Arya's feet made no sound on the worn stones of the Red Keep's inner corridors. She paused at the turn near the Tower of the Hand, listening, her senses sharper than any hound's. She wore a maid's livery, a plain brown dress, her hair pulled back beneath a cap, her face one she had borrowed from a serving girl she'd seen only once at the kitchens, fleeting, forgettable. Her hand lingered at her side, fingers brushing the cool leather of needles hilt beneath her skirt. A secret and a promise both. Far away, she could hear the muffled laughter of Sir Meryn Trant and his cronies, guards who had grown fat on bribes and slow with boredom, men who believed that King's Landing belonged to them and always would. Arya knew better. She knew, better than most, how swiftly power could shift, how the wind could change and sweep the mighty from their feet. She had watched it happen, time and again. Her father brought low by lies, her mother murdered at a feast, her brother betrayed by those who called him king. She had seen men fall, and women too, and learned the hard lessons of their deaths. Now she was here, her list recited in the quiet of her heart, her steps measured and sure. In the solar, Lord Petyr Baelish was pouring wine for Lord Giles Rosby, his laughter smooth as silk. To the future, Lord Rosby. May it be kinder than the past. He lifted his cup, his eyes glinting with secrets. Arya pressed herself against the wall, listening, her heart steady. Is it true then? Rosby croaked. The young wolf's sister, the one they say is dead. Some claim she's here, somewhere in the city. Baelish's smile widened. Many things are said, my lord. Most of them are lies. He glanced at the shadows, as if sensing her presence, but Arya was already gone, slipping away into the warren of the keep, each step taking her closer to the heart of the game. She was not alone in her hunt. Sansa was somewhere in the city, perhaps hiding behind another name, another set of lies, or perhaps lost entirely to the world. Arya had looked for her, and would look again, but now she hunted other prey, the men and women whose betrayals had soaked the stones of King's Landing with Stark blood. She had come to bring justice, or vengeance, or both. Down in Flea Bottom, the mood was different. The taverns hummed with fear and anticipation, the people hungry for bread, for hope, for change. Arya knew these streets as well as any alley cat, her memories of the city sharper than the knife she kept tucked in her boot. She drifted past the ragpickers and potboys, past the old man who muttered about dragons and the silent girls who watched from the shadows. She listened to the talk, of gold cloaks turning on their captains, of the Queen's spies and the High Septon's sermons, of a darkness gathering behind the Red Keep's high walls. Tonight, she would see the Queen. Not Cersei, not any longer. The lioness who had ruled with wine and terror was dead, trampled in the collapse of her own ambition, her skull crushed beneath falling stone. No, the true Queen was Margaery Tyrell, or so the city believed. Though Arya had her doubts. Margaery was clever, but she was not ruthless enough, not hard enough for the throne that had swallowed men whole for centuries. There were others too, all reaching for the crown. Lannisters and Tyrells, Freys and Martells, every house that thought itself strong enough to seize the city's heart. Arya was not among them. Not yet. She found Gendry at the smithy near Cobbler Square, hammering out horseshoes for the Queen's new knights. He looked up as she entered, sweat shining on his brow, eyes wary until he recognized her. Arya. Oh. He said her name like a question, like a prayer. Gendry, she replied. She slipped through the door and let it close behind her. Is it ready? He nodded, wiping his hands on a rag. As you asked. Strong. Light. The steel's the best I could find. He handed her a bundle wrapped in cloth. Arya took it, feeling the weight of it in her hands. She unwrapped it just enough to see the blade, the delicate markings on the hilt. Her father's sigil, the direwolf of Winterfell. It was needle, remade. "Thank you," she said softly. Gendry shrugged, looking away. "It's nothing. Just be careful, Arya. Things are changing. People are talking about you, about what's coming." "Memsawai." She smiled. A quick, fierce thing. Let them talk. Later, she met with her contact in the darkness behind the sept. Varys. The spider, draped in his silks and secrets. His face was as unreadable as ever, but his eyes flickered with something like respect. "You move quietly, Lady Stark." "I am no lady," Arya replied, her voice low. "I am only Arya." Varys spread his hands. "Call yourself what you will, but you are not forgotten. There are those who remember, those who wait for justice. The city is ready to be swept clean." She watched him, wary. "You know the names? I know them all." He leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Littlefinger, Qyburn, Lancel Lannister. The list goes on." Arya's heart was a cold stone in her chest. "And what do you want in return?" Varys smiled. "A better world. Or at least, a less cruel one. We want the same thing, I think." "Memnaway." She left him with the dawn. The city, waking around her. The bells tolled the hour, and the sound echoed through the streets like a warning. Arya moved with purpose now. Her plan unfolding in her mind. A map of betrayal, of blood, of justice. She would not fail. Not this time. At midday, the court gathered in the throne room. The great hall packed with lords and ladies, knights and courtiers, all vying for favor, for power, for a place in the queen's new world. Arya watched from the shadows unseen, her eyes sharp as a hawk's. Margaery sat the Iron Throne, her beauty undeniable, her smile a mask of gentleness. Beside her stood her grandmother, the Queen of Thorns, her tongue as sharp as ever. Lord Baelish was there, his eyes ever watching, his words poison in honey. Lord Varys, in his silks, moving among the great and good, gathering secrets like a spider spinning its web. Qyburn, pale and silent, lurking near the queen's side. The others too, men who had betrayed their oaths, women who had whispered treason in the dark. Arya knew them all. She waited until the moment was right. Then she stepped forward, shedding her disguise, her voice ringing out through the hall. "My name is Arya Stark, daughter of Eddard and Catelyn, sister to Robb, Sansa, Bran, and Rickon. I have come to seek justice for my family, and for the realm." A hush fell, the courtiers turning to stare, some with shock, some with fear, a few with hope. Margaery's eyes widened, her mouth open in astonishment. Baelish recovered first, his smile oily. "My Lady Stark, you are most welcome. But the court is in session. There are forms." "Forms?" Arya cut him off, her voice cold. "Were there forms when my father was murdered in this hall? When my mother and brother were slaughtered at the Twins? When my sister was beaten and shamed?" Margaery found her voice, cool and measured. "Lady Arya, these are grave accusations." Arya nodded. "Grave, yes. But true." She stepped forward, holding out a parchment. "I have proof. Letters, confessions, witness accounts, the names of every traitor who has brought ruin to this city, to this realm." A murmur ran through the crowd. Baelish's face blanched, his eyes darting. Qyburn slipped back, his hands hidden in his sleeves. Lancel Lannister paled, glancing at his cousins. Even Varys seemed unsettled, though he met Arya's gaze with something like approval. She handed the parchment to Margaery, who read it quickly, her face growing graver with each line. The Queen of Thorns snatched it from her, her eyes narrowing. "Is this true?" she demanded. "Have these men done what she claims?" Arya met her gaze, unflinching. Yes. The hall erupted into chaos, lords shouting, ladies fainting, knights drawing steel. Arya stood her ground, her hand resting on needle, her heart unyielding. She watched as Margaery and her grandmother conferred, their voices urgent, their faces set. When silence fell, Margaery spoke, her voice strong. These accusations must be answered. Lord Baelish, step forward. Baelish hesitated, his mask slipping. Your Grace, I assure you. Step forward, she repeated. He did, his hands trembling. Arya watched him, remembering the sly smile he had worn as her father died, the lies he had whispered to Sansa, the chaos he had sown. Margaery looked to Arya. Do you have witnesses? Arya nodded. Several. Some here, some outside. Bring them in. Damned. One by one the witnesses came. Servants and soldiers, merchants and maids, all with stories to tell, pieces of a puzzle that when joined, formed a damning portrait. Baelish tried to talk, to spin his webs, but the evidence was too strong. Margaery's face hardened. Traitor Baelish, I charge you with treason, with murder, with conspiracy against the crown and realm. You are hereby sentenced to death. Baelish fell to his knees, pleading, but Arya's face was a mask of stone. She stepped forward, drawing needle, her hand steady. This is for my family. And with a single swift motion, it was done. The hall was silent, all eyes on Arya. She stood, breathing hard, the weight of years pressing on her shoulders. Margaery looked at her, something like awe in her eyes. You have done the realm a service, Lady Arya. What would you have as your reward? Ben shall. Arya looked around, at the throne, at the lords and ladies, at the faces of those who had cheered her family's deaths. She saw fear there, and respect, and hope. She saw her father's face, her mother's, her brother's, all the Starks lost to war and betrayal. I want justice, she said, for all the wrongs done, not just to me, but to every family, every child, every soul who has suffered in this city's shadows. The Queen of Thorns spoke, her voice sharp. And if that means you must rule? If the people call for you? Arya hesitated, the words hanging between them. She thought of Winterfell, of the cold wind on her face, the taste of snow, the howls of wolves in the night. She thought of her family, of all she had lost. If that is what is needed, she said at last, her voice quiet but unwavering, then I will not run from it. The court erupted again, voices rising in confusion, in anger, in support. Arya stood in the center of it all, calm and certain, her purpose clear. She had come to King's Landing to bring justice, and now she would see it done. The city held its breath, waiting. In the days that followed, Arya moved through the halls of power with a quiet determination, rooting out the traitors who remained, gathering the loyal, building something new from the ashes of the old. The people watched her, some with fear, some with awe, but all with hope. She was not Sansa, with her beauty and grace. She was not Jon, with his sense of duty and honor. She was Arya, forged in the fires of loss and vengeance, shaped by the hard truths of the road. She would be a different kind of queen, if queen she must be. A queen who remembered the darkness, who understood the pain of the powerless, who would not rest until the last shadow was banished from the halls of King's Landing. Outside the city, the wind carried the scent of rain and the promise of change. The wolves were gathering, and Arya Stark was ready. And so, in the twilight of a broken world, a new dawn began. Ka. The Red Keep's great hall lingered with the hush that follows violence, the air heavy with the scent of blood, candle smoke, and sweat. Arya had killed Traitor Baelish before the gathered court, but she was not yet queen. She was the storm that had swept through the stagnant city, and now all eyes watched to see if she would break the old order, or be drowned by it. She felt the pressure, but not as a weight. It was the cold clarity she'd learned in the House of Black and White, the sense that every moment was a step on a blade, every breath measured. Arya found herself ushered, not by guards but by Marguerite Tyrell's own handmaidens, to a chamber that once belonged to the queen herself. She walked through corridors where banners hung limp, and the eyes of stone lions seemed to glare with impotent rage. The handmaidens did not speak to her, nor did she want them to. She had not slept in a real bed in weeks, but she sat, not lying down, in the carved chair by the window, watching the city burn orange beneath the evening sky. She did not close her eyes, not fully. Sleep would not come. Instead, she rehearsed the names and faces of those who remained. Qyburn, the master of whispers and monsters. Lancel and the loyalist Lannisters, still dangerous. Grand Maester Pycelle, alive but more frail than ever, his hypocrisy running deeper than the roots of the keep. Even Varys, for all his honeyed words, was a spider with his own secrets. Each one had played a part in the web that snared her family. Arya would expose them all. The door creaked. Gendry slipped in, careful as any thief, closing it behind him with a look of worry and defiance. "You shouldn't be here," Arya murmured, keeping her eyes on the city. He came closer, the warmth of him a comfort she could barely remember. "Margaery's council wants to meet at dawn. They're afraid. You should know. There's talk among the gold cloaks. And the people. Some think you're a ghost or a witch. Others think you're here to start a war." "Then now, maybe I am," Arya said. She let the words fall, heavy, uncertain. Gendry hesitated, then reached for her hand. She let him, for a moment. Let herself feel the roughness of his palm, the memory of days spent running through alleys and muddy fields. "You did what no one else dared, Arya. You ended him." She thought of Baelish's pleading eyes, the way he'd tried to beg, to lie until the last. He deserved it. They all do. Her voice faltered, just a little. "But I don't know what comes next." Gendry squeezed her hand. "You don't have to do it alone." "I never do," Arya said, but she pulled away gently. "Go. They'll be watching." When he was gone, Arya turned to her needle, the blade cool against her palm. She waited for the night to deepen, for the sounds of revelry and mourning to rise and fall. Then she moved, silent as a shadow, slipping from the queen's chamber and down the servant stairs. Her path led not to the council chamber, but to the lower levels, the dungeons, the black cells where secrets festered. She found Pycelle there, hunched over a desk in his candlelit cell, scrawling letters that would never be sent. He started when he saw her, his rheumy eyes narrowing. "Lady Stark," he wheezed, "I have always been a friend to your house." Arya stared at him, cool as the blade in her hand. "You poisoned Jon Arryn. You counseled Mad King Aerys to burn men alive. You let my father die when you could have spoken the truth." He flinched, shriveling in his robes. "I did only what I must. You did nothing. That's why you'll answer for it." She left him, not with a blade, but with a promise. She would bring his secrets to light in front of the entire court. Not all justice needed blood. Sometimes shame and truth were sharper. Her next stop was deeper still, beneath the Red Keep's foundations, where the dragon's skulls slumbered and the stench of old death clung to every stone. Qyburn waited there, his eyes hollow, his face unafraid. "You have come for me, Lady Stark." Arya nodded. "You built monsters for Cersei. You tormented children. You made war on the living and the dead." He smiled, thin and ghastly. "Monsters build monsters, my lady. And what are you? But a monster in their eyes now." Arya's voice was quiet. "Maybe I am, but I will not let you do harm again." With swift grace, she moved behind him, the darkness swallowing his gasp as she struck. She took no pleasure in it, no triumph, no satisfaction, only necessity. By dawn, Arya had not slept. She stood before the assembled council in the Queen's solar, her eyes ringed with shadows, her bearing unyielding. Marguerite Tyrell sat at the head, the Queen of Thorns beside her, her sharp gaze missing nothing. The lords of King's Landing filled the benches. Mathis Rowan, grizzled and wary. Giles Rosby, coughing. Loris Tyrell, pale with worry for his sister. Varys stood by the window, watching Arya as if she were a riddle he'd yet to solve. Margaery's voice rang clear. "Lady Arya, the city waits for your word. What will you do?" Arya looked at them, feeling the weight of history pressing in. The legacy of rulers who had failed, who had lied, who had spilled blood and called it peace. There will be trials. Not the kind you held for my father or my brother's bannermen. Open trials, with witnesses, with truth. Every traitor, every conspirator, every murderer who thinks himself safe behind titles and gold. They will answer to the realm, and to the small folk. Not just the highborn. Then from now on. A stunned silence greeted her. The Queen of Thorns was first to speak. Her mouth curled in wry approval. "You'd break the wheel then, as Daenerys Targaryen once dreamed. Are you ready for the cost, girl?" Arya's jaw tightened. "I paid already. My family paid." Loris Tyrell, his voice tentative, asked, "And if the people call for your rule?" "I never wanted a crown," Arya said. "But I will not turn from it if the city needs me. I will rule with justice, no more secrets, no more lies. The people deserve better." Margaery's eyes searched her face, her own fears and ambitions flickering in their depths. "And what of Sansa? What of Jon Snow? They are Starks," Arya said softly. "But they have their own paths. Sansa is safe in the north. Jon..." She let the words hang. No one truly knew where Jon Snow was, now that peace had settled, brittle as frost. The council dispersed, some muttering, some thoughtful. Arya stood alone by the window, watching dawn gild the city's rooftops. She could feel it in the air. Change, dangerous and electric. That afternoon, Arya moved among the people. She walked in the open, not hidden, not masked. The city looked at her and saw the girl from the north, the wolf who had come to hunt the hunters. Small folk pressed around her, murmuring questions, some reaching to touch her sleeve as if to prove she was real. A mother wept, clutching her child, and whispered, "You'll bring justice, won't you, lady?" Arya nodded, offering a promise she did not know if she could keep. "I will try." From the steps of the Sept of Baelor, now a burned ruin but still the city's heart, she called an assembly. The bell was rung, and the square filled, words spreading like wildfire. The Stark girl would speak. No queen had done so in memory. Arya climbed the steps, Gendry at her side, not as a knight, but as a friend. Her voice, when it came, was strong, forged in loss and longing. "I am Arya Stark, daughter of Winterfell. I have seen what your lords do in secret, the way they treat you, the way they treat each other. It ends here. There will be trials. You will be heard. If you have been wronged, speak. If you have seen crimes, tell them. No one will harm you for the truth. I promise." A ripple of hope and disbelief swept through the crowd. An old woman stepped forward, shivering with fear but determined. "My son was pressed into service by Sir Meryn Trant. He never came back." "Nender?" Arya nodded. "Tell the council what happened. I will see justice done." One after another, the people came, their voices tentative but growing stronger. Names were named, crimes recounted. The city's filth came bubbling to the surface, impossible to ignore. Arya stood through it all, her resolve hardening. In the Red Keep, a court was convened, unlike any before it. There were no closed doors, no secrets. The council sat, the highborn and the small folk together, listening as each witness spoke. Margaery presided, but Arya was the soul of it. She sat with Needle at her side, her presence a warning to all who had profited by the old ways. Lancel Lannister was the first brought before them. He looked diminished, the swagger gone from his step. The evidence was overwhelming. Testimony, letters, confessions. Arya asked him only one question. "Did you betray my family?" He could not meet her eyes. "Yes," he whispered. "You will not die." Arya said. "But you will spend your life repairing the harm you did. You will serve the orphans of this city until your debts are paid." Some lords scoffed at this mercy, but the people cheered. Justice, without needless blood. Next came Pycelle, brought up from the dungeons, his crimes recited for all to hear. The council voted. He would be stripped of his chain, exiled from King's Landing, his wealth distributed to the city's poorest. As day turned to night, traitor after traitor was unmasked. Some executed, some banished, some condemned to labor. The Queen of Thorns kept a running tally. "You'll empty half the court at this rate, girl. You're making history." Arya allowed herself a wry smile. That's the plan. It was not only the guilty who came before her. From Dorne and the Riverlands came envoys offering fealty, not to Margaery, but to Arya. Letters arrived from the Vale, from the north, even from the Iron Islands, recognizing her right to rule if she chose. The city was changing. The old houses were broken, the new order unformed. Late that night, Arya returned to her borrowed chamber. She found Sansa there, waiting in the candlelight, cloaked in traveling clothes. "Sansa." Arya breathed, running to her sister. They embraced, the years between them falling away. "I had to see it for myself," Sansa whispered. "The girl they call the Wolf Queen." Arya laughed softly, tears pricking her eyes. "I'm no queen." Sansa smiled, proud and sad at once. "You are, Arya. The people love you. They need you. You'll be better than any of them." Arya shook her head. "I'm not like you, Sansa. I'm not meant for courts and councils. But you are meant for justice. You always were. Father would be proud." They sat together as the candle burned low, speaking of home, of their brothers, of the north and the wolves who ran through their dreams. Sansa pressed Arya's hand, her voice fierce. "Do not forget yourself in this place, Arya. Rule if you must, but do not let them change you." Arya promised, though she knew how hard it would be. The city pressed on her, its expectations a tide. She would not drown. The days that followed were a trial by fire. Arya led the council, exposing plots, untangling lies. She sent envoys to the north, inviting Jon and Bran to return. She met with the captains of the city watch, rooting out corruption and raising honest men and women in their place. She ordered the granaries open to feed the hungry, set healers to work in the poorest districts, and sent her knights to patrol the streets, not as lords but as guardians. The city began to heal. Slowly, the fear lifted. People sang her name in the markets. Children ran after her, calling her Wolf Queen, their laughter bright. But not all welcomed her. Old enemies plotted in shadow. Varys warned her of whispers from the Reach and the Westerlands. Lannister cousins, Freys, men who dreamed of restoring the old ways. Arya paid them little heed. She knew danger, but she knew herself better. One night, as she walked the ramparts above the city, Gendry found her. He joined her in silence, watching the stars wheel above the Blackwater. "You could rule, Arya," he said at last. "Truly rule. You have the people, the lords, the crown if you want it." She shook her head. "I'm not made for crowns." He smiled. "Neither was your father. But he wore one all the same in the north." Arya looked out over the city that had stolen her childhood and her family, the city she had conquered with nothing but truth and steel. "If I take the crown," she said, "I do it for them. For every girl who lost her father, for every boy who starved in the streets. Not for myself." Gendry took her hand, and this time, she did not let go. Winter was coming, but so was hope. And Arya Stark would be ready for both. Okay. In the quiet that came after her decision, Arya felt the cold more acutely than before. It was not the winter wind from the north, but something sharper. A chill born of choices and the silence that always follows the clamor of crowds. In the days since her open assembly, King's Landing had transformed. Where once the markets buzzed with fear and suspicion, now hope trembled in the voices of the small folk. Justice, a word long emptied of meaning in the capital, began to gather substance again. Arya's morning started before the sun's first rays kissed the gilded rooftops of the Red Keep. She met with the new council, no longer a cabal of highborn schemers, but a collection of men and women chosen from each district of the city. There was Davos Seaworth, summoned south as her hand and guide, whose honesty was known to all. Alisan, a healer from Flea Bottom, whose wisdom was forged from tending to wounds that gold could never cure. Sir Tal Tarley, a hard-eyed knight, who had served quietly under the Tyrells and won respect without ambition. Others too. The baker's daughter who had seen her brother conscripted and broken by the old regime. The old fishmonger who had supplied the city through 2 sieges. A maester's apprentice eager for learning more than obedience. They sat together in the small council chamber, its walls stripped of Lannister crimson and Tyrell gold, the banners replaced by the dire wolf of House Stark and the city's own sigil. Each meeting began the same way. Arya asked after the city's needs. Not the Lord's demands or the merchant's schemes, but what the people lacked. Grain, clean water, a just hearing. She listened. She remembered what it felt like to be powerless, to have no one in the world who would listen or believe. On this morning, Davos spread a sheaf of letters before her. Ravens from every corner, m'lady. The North pledges men, if you call. The Reach offers grain if you declare Margaery guilty and make peace with her kin. The Iron Islands. He paused, his mouth twitching. They want gold. Arya smiled. A small thing, but real. And what do we have to offer them? He shrugged. Justice, maybe. That's worth more than gold to some, less to others. Sir Tal shifted in his seat. There are whispers, my queen. Not all lords are content with trials. Some call it weakness, mercy for traitors. Arya met his gaze. It's easy to be merciless when you've never tasted fear. The small folk need to see that the law is for all, not just the highborn. Alisan leaned forward. There's a fever in the South Market. Too many crowded together, not enough clean water. The granaries will need guards if we open them. Do it, Arya said at once. Post the Night's Watch. What's left of them. If Jon comes, I want him to see the city isn't starving. Davos made a note, his hand steady. Word is Jon Snow's on the King's Road, coming south. Some say the Targaryen girl's with him. Arya stilled. The memory of Daenerys Targaryen. Her dragons. Her fire. Her fury was a shadow in the city still. Arya's mind wandered to Jon, her lost brother, the one who always tried to do what was right even as the world punished him for it. She wondered what he would make of this new King's Landing, or of her. She dismissed the council after midday. In the corridors, the servants stepped back to let her pass, their eyes wide and wary. Arya made her way down into the lower city, Gendry at her side. He wore no armor, just a smith's tunic and a hammer on his belt. But people knew him as the bastard who'd become a lord, and more than that, as her friend. They passed the rebuilt sept, where the old stones bore scorch marks from wildfire. The square was filled with people, vendors hawking apples and hard bread, children darting through legs, women bartering for soap and meat. Arya stopped to watch as a young girl, no older than she had been when she first arrived in King's Landing, stood on a barrel reciting the wolf song, her own deeds already passing into legend. She chased the lion from the keep. She gave the people bread. She found the traitors in their sleep, and chopped off Baelish's head. The crowd laughed and tossed coins. Arya slipped away before they could spot her, a shadow even in daylight. She went next to the city watch barracks. The gold cloaks, once corrupt, had been purged. Their new captain, a woman named Jane Waters, greeted Arya with a quick, respectful nod. We're keeping the peace, m'lady. Some say the brothels are full of Lannister men plotting to restore their line. Now, Arya shook her head. If the Lannisters want to plot, let them do it in the open. Arrest anyone who breaks the law, but leave no one bleeding in an alley for their name alone. Jane grinned. You sound more like your father every day. Arya bristled at the comparison but said nothing. She knew Ned Stark's shadow walked beside her, and sometimes she welcomed it. By afternoon, Arya returned to the keep. Sansa waited for her in the Queen's solar, her hair braided with winter roses. Sansa's grace was different from Arya's, quiet, watchful, gentle in a way Arya could never be. They sat by the window overlooking Blackwater Bay, speaking in low voices. "You're changing the city, Arya," Sansa said. "But you can't do it alone forever. The lords will push back. The faith will push back. Even the people. Hope can curdle to fear in a day." "Then me." Arya's eyes were sharp. "I'll hold until Jon arrives. After that, who knows?" Sansa took her hand, a soft pressure. "Don't let them break you." A bell tolled in the distance. A rider from the north had arrived. It was almost dusk when Arya rode out to the city gates, Gendry and Davos beside her. A crowd had gathered, word spreading like wildfire. Jon Snow was returning to the city that had damned their father. Arya's heart beat fast, not with fear, but with anticipation. Jon rode at the head of a column of riders, Daenerys beside him, her silver hair tucked beneath a plain cloak. Their faces were tired, older than Arya remembered. Jon's eyes found hers first, and he smiled. Weary but true. Arya dismounted and ran to him, embracing her brother. For a moment, the city was gone. The wars, the deaths, the hunger. She was just Arya, and he was Jon. They spoke quietly as the crowd pressed closer. Jon's words gentle. "You did it, Arya." "They say you're queen." Arya shook her head. "Only until you came." He studied her, then looked to Daenerys, who met Arya's eyes with curiosity and caution. "I'm not here to claim a throne," Daenerys said softly. "The realm has had enough of fire and blood." Arya nodded. "Then help us build something new." Inside the Red Keep, Arya called the council to order. Jon sat at her right, Daenerys at his side, Sansa beside Arya. Davos, Gendry, Alysanne, the others ringed the table. They spoke late into the night, of food and fealty, of peace and punishment. They debated the role of the faith, the rights of the small folk, the rebuilding of the city's burned quarters. Daenerys was quieter than Arya had imagined, her voice thoughtful. "The wheel turns, but someone must hold the spokes. If you are queen, Arya, rule for the people, not for the lords." Arya listened. She knew Daenerys' story, her triumphs, her rage, the cost of her mercy, and her vengeance. Jon stood as the moon rose high. "The North will follow you, Arya. Not because you are my sister, but because you have done what none of us could. You brought justice to King's Landing." Gendry grinned. The Wolf Queen." Arya laughed, a sound that startled the council. "So be it. If the people will me to rule, I will. But I will not be a queen on a throne of lies." Over the next weeks, Arya worked alongside Jon, Daenerys, and Sansa. The trials continued, open, fair, with judgments made by council and people both. The last of the Lannister loyalists were tried. Some went to the wall. Some were sent into exile. A few, those whose hands dripped with blood, met the executioner's sword. Arya walked among the small folk, listening to their needs. She ordered the city's wells cleaned, the granaries replenished, the walls repaired. She sent ravens to every corner of the realm, calling for craftsmen, healers, and teachers to rebuild not just King's Landing, but the kingdom itself. She refused the silks and jewels of royalty, wearing only plain dresses or her old leather tunic when she could. She took her meals with the council or the city watch, never alone. She let the people see her laugh, see her grieve, see her rage against injustice. They called her the Wolf Queen, but they also called her the Just. At night, Arya would walk the battlements with Gendry. They spoke little, comfortable in each other's silence. Sometimes, Sansa joined them, her laughter ringing over the dark stones. Once, Jon and Daenerys came. Jon, speaking of the wildlings' lives beyond the wall. Daenerys sharing stories of dragons and distant lands. Arya listened, feeling the world growing larger, more possible. The Queen of Thorns lingered in King's Landing longer than Arya expected. One evening, she found Arya alone in the Godswood, the heart tree transplanted from the north, its white bark a shock in the southern night. "You have changed the game, girl," Olenna Tyrell said, her voice softer than usual. "But beware, men like Baelish are never truly gone." Their kind take root in shadows. Arya nodded. I'll keep watch. Olenna studied her. I have seen many queens. Most were weak or mad or both. You are neither, but you are alone in a way none of them were. I have my family, Arya said. For now, Olenna replied. But she smiled. Rule well, Wolf Queen. Seasons turned. Grain ships arrived from the Reach, gold from the Iron Bank, iron from the north. The city's wounds healed slowly, but they healed. The small folk feasted at harvest. The river was clean for the first time in years. The city's orphans found homes and the Old Thieves Guild became a school. One winter night, Arya stood on the balcony of the Queen's Tower, watching snow fall over the city. Gendry joined her, silent and sturdy. I never thought I'd see snow in King's Landing, he said. Arya smiled. Nor did I. They watched the flakes drift down, covering the scars of the past. Arya felt hope, a thing she'd learned to mistrust, now blooming in her chest, like spring in the north. Do you regret it? Gendry asked quietly. Arya shook her head. I regret the losses, but not this. He took her hand. You were always meant to lead, Arya. Maybe not as queen, but as yourself. She turned to face him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Stay with me, Gendry. Not as a lord, not as a knight, just as you. He nodded, and together they watched the snow fall. The city below them quiet, dreaming of wolves. When dawn came, Arya rode out through the city gates with Jon, Sansa, and Daenerys. They traveled to the ruins of the Dragon Pit, where the bones of the past lay scattered. Arya knelt and placed a white rose among the stones, a promise to the future. She stood, and for the first time, saw the city as it might be. Not a place of fear, but of hope. She felt her family beside her, living and dead, and knew that she was not alone. The wheel had turned, but Arya Stark had not been broken. She was the Wolf Queen, the just, and the city was hers, changed forever, and forever changing. The story would last, not in songs or banners, but in the lives she'd saved, the justice she'd restored, and the hope she'd kindled in the hearts of all who called King's Landing home. Oh, hey. The first true winter in King's Landing in 100 years descended slow and inexorable. Gray and bone deep, carrying a hush that blanketed the city in a kind of awed anticipation. Arya Stark, the Wolf Queen as the city had named her, stood at the highest window of Maegor's Holdfast, watching the snow fall thick on the ancient stones and tile roofs. In the white silence, the city felt unfamiliar, remade. She'd often wondered, as a girl in Winterfell, what King's Landing might look like under a northern sky. She never imagined it would be hers to guard. Behind her, the chamber was bright with firelight and the muted clatter of her council. They came early and stayed late these days. Davos Seaworth, her hand, sat on her left, his fingers stained with ink from the ceaseless letters he sent to every corner of the realm. Sansa was opposite him, cool and composed, always watchful. Indri, now master of arms, and Alysanne, the healer from Fleabottom, joined them. Maester Samwell Tarly had returned to serve as her Grand Maester, his books and letters filling the shelves, his gentle wisdom another shield against the city's old ghosts. The council table was no longer a place for secret plots. Arya demanded every voice be heard, and small folk sometimes joined them, their fears and wants spoken aloud in a way that once would have been unthinkable. Still, the city's old blood, what remained of it, grumbled. Word filtered up from the docks and the inns. Not all would ever bow to a wolf. But each day, the bark grew softer. Now as Arya watched the snow swirl, she felt a tug at her sleeve. It was a boy from the kitchens, eyes wide. "They're ready for you, Your Grace," he whispered, and she smiled her thanks, slipping needle's thin hilt into her belt. She crossed the solar and took her seat. Today, the matter at hand was bread. Always bread. The snow had choked off southern caravans, and the sea was too wild for ships. The city's grain stores would last the winter only with rationing and fair hands on the scales. Davos leaned close. "We can stretch it, but it will be tight. There's always the Tyrell stores, if Lady Margaery would." "Lady Margaery has given all she can," Sansa said, a flicker of frost in her tone. The Tyrells must keep their own alive, or the Reach will turn to dust. Gendry drummed his fingers. The Riverlands are willing to send oats, but they want salt and iron in return. Arya listened, letting the voices blend into a tide. She looked for solutions not in grand promises, but in the plain-spoken resolve of her council. Alysanne, she asked, how fares the city's health? Alysanne folded her hands, her knuckles raw from winter air. Not as ill as last year. The fever is gone thanks to clean water. The old and young are weakest. If we ration, they must be first to eat. Arya nodded. Do it. Gendry, send word to the Riverlands. We'll give them salt, but no iron. Not until the grain is at the city gate. Samwell looked up from his notes. The Faith has offered to open the granaries beneath the Great Septi. They want a public blessing from you, Your Grace. Arya hesitated. Her own faith was in the old gods, the weirwood tree transplanted to the godswood, a reminder of her true home. But the people of the city were different. They needed to see unity, not division. Let the High Septon announce the opening, but I'll speak as well. The city will see it's not the gods who feed them, but each other. The council agreed, and the day's business moved on. They spoke of roads to be cleared, walls to be mended, thieves to be tried. Arya's eyes grew heavy as the hours passed, but she did not yield. The council would not adjourn until every voice was heard, every quarrel aired. After, when the fire had burned low, Arya stepped out onto the snow-covered balcony. The city below was transformed. The black river curved between white embankments. The alleys were muffled, and the lamplighters' glow shone golden on drifts that had never touched the capital before. She heard boots behind her. Jon joined her, his cloak dusted with snow. His eyes searched the city, the weight of the north still clinging to him. You look like a Stark up here, Arya said softly. He smiled, the old sadness in his eyes. So do you. They watched the snow fall in silence. At length, Jon spoke. Sansa says you rule well. The North stands with you. Arya nodded. For how long? As long as you are just. As long as you remember who you are. She looked down at her hands. Chapped and pale. I am Arya. I'll never be like Mother or like Sansa. I don't want a crown, Jon. But I want the city to be better. I want it to be safe. Jon put a hand on her shoulder. That's enough. That's more than most ever wanted. The next morning, Arya rode out through the city's winding streets. Gendry at her side, a column of knights watched brothers following. The people came to see her, not out of fear, but curiosity. Some knelt, but most simply watched, their faces hopeful. They stopped at the Sept, where the High Septon greeted them with a practiced smile. The square was filled, the small folk pressing close, the air sharp with cold. Arya mounted the steps, needle at her side, and spoke with the wind tangling her hair. This city has seen too many winters of fear and hunger. We are all one people, noble and common, old and new. The granaries open today not by the will of gods or queens, but because we stand together. If you have more than you need, share it. If you have less, take what you require. This is how we endure. There was a murmur of approval, and as the faith spells tolled, the granaries were opened. Bread was handed out by the Septus and city watch alike. For the first time in living memory, no one was trampled, no child left behind. Arya spent the rest of the day walking the city. In Flea Bottom, she sat by a fire with children whose parents had died in the last war, listening to their stories. In the West Market, she watched Gendry teach smiths to mend a broken plow with scrap iron. In the East End, she found Alysanne tending a sick boy, and knelt to help wash the child's fevered brow. At dusk, she returned to the Red Keep, her cloak soaked and heavy. Sansa met her in the Godswood, where the heart tree stood silent beneath its snowy mantle. You can't be everywhere, Arya, Sansa said gently. You must let others help. Arya sank to her knees at the tree's roots. If I don't see it with my own eyes, I can't be sure. The city's been ruled by monsters too long? Sansa knelt beside her, tucking her hand into Arya's. Then trust those you love. Trust the people. You gave them hope. They'll carry it now. They sat in silence, the city's heartbeat slowing with the falling snow. Later, Arya found herself in the kitchens, sharing soup with Davos and Samwell, laughing for the first time in days. Gendry joined them, flour on his cheek, and Arya thought she had never seen him look so content. But not all was peace. Beyond the walls, old enemies watched. In the Reach, the Tyrell bannermen chafed at Margaery's restraint, their gold drained to feed the capital. In the Westerlands, Lannister cousins whispered of vengeance. Across the sea, in the free cities, exiles plotted, their eyes fixed on the Iron Throne. And within the city, there were still those who profited from chaos, men who dreamed of the old order's return. Late that night, Arya was summoned by Varys, the spider, who'd remained as her master of whisperers. She found him in his tower, surrounded by candles and maps. "Your Grace," he said, bowing. "News from the west. A plot stirs. Sir Adam Marbrand and the Lannister kin in Lannisport rally mercenaries. They mean to strike when the winter breaks." Arya's face hardened. "How many?" 1,000, maybe 2. Enough to cause panic. Enough to draw the old lords to their side if you falter." She thought for a long moment. "Send word to Davos. We'll raise a watch on the roads, and to the Riverlands. If they stand with us, the Lannisters cannot pass." Varys smiled faintly. "You are your father's daughter." Arya's mouth twisted. "My father trusted the wrong men. I won't make that mistake." For a week, she barely slept. The council met in secret, sending ravens, raising patrols. Arya went among the city's people by day and the guards by night, listening for fear, for rumors, for danger. She wore plain clothes and carried needle at her side, moving as a shadow in the torchlit dark. One night, she came upon a group of boys stealing bread from the granaries. They froze when they saw her, but Arya knelt, meeting their frightened eyes. "Why do you steal?" she asked. One boy, thin and wild-haired, spoke up. "Our man's sick. There's not enough. The gold cloaks take half for themselves." Arya felt a cold fury. "Show me." They led her to a crumbling tenement where 2 children lay sick beside their mother. Arya stayed, tending them as Alysanne had taught her. At dawn, she summoned Jane Waters, the captain of the watch, and in front of the entire barracks, dismissed the men who had stolen from the people. "King's Landing will not be ruled by fear and greed again," Arya declared. "If you cannot protect, you will be replaced." Word spread. The people saw that justice was not just for the lords, and the city's hope grew. Winter stretched on, but the city endured. The Riverlands sent oats, the Reach what little they could spare. Sansa took charge of organizing new soup kitchens, and Jon drilled the city's defenses with Gendry. The faith's priests, seeing Arya's resolve, preached unity and charity, their sermons echoing through the snow. The day finally came when the Lannister host tried to cross the Trident. Arya rode north with Jon Davos and a column of the city's best. She wore her father's old cloak, needle at her hip, Gendry at her right hand. They met the Lannisters at dawn, the river shrouded in mist. Arya parleyed with Sir Adam Marbrand beneath a weirwood sapling. "You come for the throne?" Arya asked. Marbrand was bold, his eyes hard. "We come for justice, for the old ways." Arya shook her head. "The old ways are dead. Go back to your lords. Tell them justice lives in King's Landing now." He refused, and the battle was swift and sharp. Arya led the charge, riding at Jon's side, her blade flashing in the winter sun. The city soldiers fought not for gold, but for her, for the Wolf Queen who had listened and cared. The Lannisters broke. Marbrand was captured. The River Lords pledged again to Arya. She rode back into King's Landing to the cheers of the people, her cloak torn, her hair loose in the cold wind. That night, there was a feast in the great hall. Bread was broken. Songs were sung. Arya stood and raised her cup. To the people of this city, to those who endured, to those who fought, to those who dared to hope. This is your victory. Ben Eddie. The cheers that followed were loud and long, echoing through the ancient stones. Arya felt the weight of her crown, but also its warmth. A trust freely given, not seized by force. Later, alone on the ramparts, Arya found Sansa waiting. "You did it," Sansa said softly. "We did it," Arya replied. "All of us." Snow drifted around them, the city sleeping below. Arya looked out at the world she had remade, and for the first time, let herself believe that justice could last, that hope could grow even from the coldest winter. She was the Wolf Queen, once a shadow, now the heart of a city reborn. And so winter passed, and with it, the last whispers of the old order. In spring, the city would bloom again, and Arya Stark would be ready. Queen, not by birthright, but by the trust and love of her people, the direwolf who had hunted out every shadow, the girl who had found her way home at last. Spring crept into King's Landing almost in secret. One day the snow drifts in the streets seemed impenetrable. The next, the white had melted to slush, and the sun pressed warm fingers through the battered city gates. Arya felt the change in her bones, the slow thaw, after long cold. She walked in the gardens with Sansa and Alysanne, taking the measure of what winter had left them. The lemon trees were black sticks, the grass sodden and brown. But from the earth's wounds green shoots pressed upward. Irrepressible. The Wolf Queen's court was changing too. When Arya first claimed the council chamber, her presence had filled it with silence and awe. Now the counselors bickered and teased, sometimes even laughing. It was not the careless laughter of old lords, but the laughter of people who felt the world might, finally, be mending. Maester Samwell returned from the libraries each day with a new report, and Davos had sent word to the Stepstones. New trade routes might open if Arya would parley with the pirate captains and offer them pardon and a share of the harbor's tariffs. Arya listened to all, her face grave, her mind restless. Gendry worried she took no rest, and sometimes tried to draw her into the smithy's heat and simple work, but Arya's hands were rarely still, and her mind less so. She saw plots everywhere, threats in every kindness. But now, with winter's end, she found herself watching the people as much as the lords. The children flying kites above the snowmelt, the old men playing tiles in the sun, a young woman reading by the city wall, her hair a vivid shade of red that reminded Arya of her own childhood. It was Sansa who drew Arya from her cares one morning, pressing a folded letter into her hand. From the Vale. Lord Roy sends his congratulations on the peace, and asks if you'll support the marriage of his nephew to Lady Celia Arryn. Arya grinned. A marriage for power or for love, do you think? Sansa smiled, a wry edge to her mouth. There's always both, Arya. Even in peace, the game remains. They walked together through the yard, watching the castle guards drill under Joan's watchful eye. Arya's presence drew less attention now. She moved among the city as one of its own, not only as its ruler. She took meals in the kitchens, sometimes eating bread and fish with the children rescued from Flea Bottom, sometimes sitting in on lessons with the maester's apprentices. She listened more than she spoke, and learned the secret currents of her people's hearts. When the first foreign ship docked in Blackwater Bay, its sails striped red and gold, the Lion of Lannister repurposed for trade, instead of war, the city braced for trouble. But Arya met the Lannister envoy in open council, inviting the merchant to speak as an equal, not a conqueror. Word spread quickly. Gold would flow again, but not only to old names. Arya's court granted charters for new merchants, many from the small folk, and by the week's end, the city markets bustled with wares from Pentos and Old Town and even the distant Summer Islands. Justice remained her first concern. The spring rains brought reports of bandits preying on the outlying villages, many former soldiers who had served in the war and knew only violence. Arya rode out with Gendry, Davos, and a handful of her new city guards, their cloaks marked by the direwolf and the city's sigil entwined. The people were startled to see their queen among them, muddy-booted and sword at her hip. But word spread that the Wolf Queen was no courtly recluse, that she saw with her own eyes the truth of the realm. In the village of Hayford, they found the miller's daughter wounded, her father missing, the well poisoned. Arya spent the day listening to their grievances, tending wounds with Alysanne, and organizing the able-bodied into watches. When night fell, Arya set a trap for the bandits, sitting in the tavern with Gendry and Davos as bait. The raiders came as expected, 3 desperate men, and a boy barely older than Arya herself, when she'd first left Winterfell. There was a fight, swift and brutal, and at the end Arya found herself holding the trembling boy by the scruff of his neck. She knelt, eye to eye with him. "You don't have to be a wolf or a sheep," she said. "There are other ways." She sent the boy to the city, apprenticed to the smiths, the other bandits to labor rebuilding what they'd destroyed. She did not relish punishment, but she did not shirk it either. Returning to King's Landing, Arya found Sansa waiting in the solar. A map spread across the table. "There's more unrest," Sansa said, pointing to marks near the Stormlands and the Duskendale coast. "If you want peace, you'll have to make it." Arya studied the map. Send ravens to the lords. Invite them to King's Landing. If they refuse, I'll ride out myself. Nah. You mean to rule with the sword forever? Sansa's voice was soft, but sharp. Arya shook her head. I mean to rule so the sword isn't needed. The great hall filled with banners over the coming weeks. Lords and ladies arrived from every corner. Dour men from the Dreadfort, dark-eyed Dornish women, merchants from Gulltown, even a few uneasy Ironborn, their oath sullen but binding. Arya sat the throne in plain clothes, needle at her side. She listened to complaints, offered judgment, forgave old debts where she could, demanded restitution where she must. The city marveled at her patience, and slowly, grudgingly, respect replaced fear. Marguerite Tyrell, now head of her house in all but name, arrived late and swept into the keep trailing rumors. She greeted Arya in the godswood, hands clasped. You've done what I never could. United this city without a drop of honeyed wine or threat of fire. Arya shrugged. I learned from watching others' mistakes. Marguerite's eyes glittered. They'll test you, Arya. They'll never stop. But you have one thing no other ruler did. No one knows what you'll do next. Keep them guessing. After Marguerite departed, Arya set about creating her vision for the city. She reopened the city's guilds and expanded the council, adding voices from the docks and the crafts, not only from the old noble lines. She called for a citywide moot, inviting even the poorest to send delegates. Laws were debated in the open. Old customs were honored but not obeyed blindly. The faith grumbled at Arya's lenience toward orphans and foundlings, but her defense of the weak won her loyalty impossible to buy. One night, in the quiet of her chamber, Arya wrote a letter to Bran in the north. She described the changes, the people she'd met, her hopes and fears. She wrote of the seasons turning, and of the sense she had that something old and broken was being knit together again. I am not the girl who left Winterfell, she wrote, but I am still Arya. And sometimes I think that's enough. Jon, still restless even with peace, traveled often to the Stormlands and Dorne, forging alliances. He returned in early summer, leaner and harder, but with a smile for Arya that reached his eyes. Together they rode the city walls, looking out over the river where children splashed, and spoke of the future. You were never meant for this, Arya, Jon said one evening as the sun bled into the horizon. Arya smiled. I wasn't meant for anything. That's why I can do it. Ben sigh. Gendry joined them, and Arya leaned against his shoulder, letting herself feel for a little while that the burdens of rule could be shared. Sansa watched them from a window above, a quiet pride on her face. Not all trials were grand. A baker accused of cheating his apprentices came before Arya, and she ordered him to spend a month in the kitchens he'd neglected. A knight who'd killed a man in a drunken brawl was sentenced to serve as a peacekeeper in the worst district of the city. Arya's punishments were seen as strange by some, but most found them just, and King's Landing grew calmer each day. In the summer, the moot met. Delegates from every walk of life filled the great hall, their voices clashing like storm tides. Arya presided with Sansa and Davos on either side, Gendry and Alysanne standing by the doors, a visible promise that the city's strength and compassion would be enforced together. After days of heated debate, Arya proposed her greatest change, a city charter that guaranteed certain rights for all, not just for those with gold or swords. The vote was nearly unanimous. The faith grumbled. Some lords abstained, but the people cheered, and for the first time, Arya saw real hope in their eyes. As the days lengthened and the city's wounds continued to heal, Arya found moments of quiet. Sometimes she walked alone in the Godswood, or rode out to the river's edge to fish with Gendry. Sometimes she knelt at the heart tree and whispered names. Her father, her mother, Robb, Rickon, all the dead who had carried her here. One night, as the full moon flooded the city in silver, Arya stood atop the battlements, the wind tugging her hair. Jon found her there, wordless, and together they looked out over the city that had changed them both. "You could leave, you know," Jon said softly. "The city would endure. You've given them what they need to survive." Arya shook her head, smiling at the wild, sprawling city below. "It's not just about surviving. I want them to dream, to believe they can be more than what the world tells them. That's why I stay." Jon squeezed her shoulder. "Then you are truly queen, not of a city, but of hope itself." Dawn broke. In the streets, vendors cried wares, children sang, and bells tolled for a wedding, not a funeral. Arya Stark, once a ghost in rumor, stood at her window and watched the city bloom. The Wolf Queen's reign was young, her trials many, but as the first roses of summer opened along the palace walls, Arya knew the realm she'd built was stronger than fear, truer than steel. It was made of the people themselves, woven, like her, from pain, from courage, and at last, from hope. On the morning of Arya Stark's second name day as queen, King's Landing trembled with energy, a city transformed by seasons of change. From the narrowest alley of Flea Bottom to the marbled corridors of the Red Keep, the air was thick with birdsong and the perfume of lemon blossoms climbing over scorched walls. The sun broke across rooftops where banners of Wolfen City flew side by side, a new tradition that had replaced the lion's crimson, gold, and silent threat with a promise of vigilance. Arya woke before dawn, as she often did, but now it was not worry or fear that tugged her from bed, but habit, a restlessness that was no longer the old itch to run, but an impulse to move, to know, to see for herself. She had always hated to be still. Padding barefoot across rushes in her chamber, she looked down at the city below, blue-shadowed in the new light. The square outside the Sept was crowded, not with beggars or executions, but with a market of farmers from the Reach, Riverlands, and even Dorne, their stalls heaped with strawberries and blood oranges, and the first peas of spring. Gendry was still sleeping, his brow furrowed in some dream. Arya watched him a moment, quietly glad to see him at peace, then dressed in simple wool and leather and slipped from the room. Her steps echoed softly as she moved through the keep, pausing only to greet the guards. Some veterans, some boys and girls barely older than she'd been when she'd first learned what cruelty and mercy truly meant. Down in the kitchens, the bakers were already at work, flour dusting the air. Arya plucked a crust of bread and nodded thanks to the old cook, who was humming a song from the north. The small folk had learned to expect the queen's visits, but there was always a hush when she came near, the hush that greeted someone who had bled and worked for their peace. As Arya left the keep and stepped into the gardens, she found Sansa sitting by the fish pond, a book open on her knees, her hair shining in the pale sun. Sansa looked up, her eyes bright, and closed the book, marking her place with a sprig of mint. "Happy name day, little sister," she said, smiling with real warmth. Arya grinned. "You're the only one who remembers, I think." Sansa shook her head. "You've always been hard to forget. There's something planned tonight. Don't pretend you don't know." Arya snorted. "If there's cake, I want lemon, and none of those silly minstrels singing about wolves with golden eyes." Sansa's laughter was soft, a note of music Arya found herself cherishing more each year. "You get what you get. The city loves its stories." She sobered, her gaze drifting to the walls. "You've given them hope. Even the lords are beginning to believe in it." Arya settled beside her, watching a swallow dip across the water. "For now, but hope needs tending." Sansa closed her book and touched Arya's arm. "And you need rest." They sat a while longer, the peace of the gardens settling around them. Arya knew it was a fragile thing, this quiet. but she was learning to trust that it could last, at least for a little while. As the sun rose, Arya began her rounds, accompanied by Gendry, now awake and rumpled, Davos Seaworth with his steady step and careful gaze, and Maester Samwell, ever eager for news. They walked the streets openly, passing markets where laughter mingled with the cries of sellers, visiting the newly built school where a dozen girls recited their letters. Arya watched as a baker's daughter read a passage from the Seven-Pointed Star, then swapped it for a scrap of The Tales of Nymeria, eyes alight with mischief. At the harbor, Davos pointed to the new ships, sleek, swift, painted with the direwolf. "The first of our fleet, m'lady," he said with quiet pride. "They'll keep the narrow sea safe and honest." Arya grinned. "Honest, Davos? In King's Landing?" He laughed. "Miracles do happen." She spent the late morning in the law courts, hearing petitions. A tanner and a goldsmith disputed the ownership of a plot by the river. Arya listened, asked questions, and ruled in favor of the goldsmith, but ordered him to pay the tanner for improvements. Two orphans brought by Alysanne spoke of a cruel foreman in the city's west end. Arya promised an inquiry and sent Surtal to see to it that very day. Each matter was small in itself, but together they built a foundation stronger than stone. Word of Arya's judgments traveled fast. That afternoon, when she walked through the Silk Street, the women of the brothels called greetings and pressed sweetmeats into her hand. A band of city children followed, laughing, calling her Arya the Just, their voices echoing among the painted doors and colored silks. Arya let herself smile, thinking of her father and mother, of the ways their lessons lived on in her even now. Not all was easy. Letters came from the Reach, warning of a poor harvest. The lords of the Vale grumbled over the city's tax on imported grain. In the west, a new self-styled king of the Rock raised his banner, though reports suggested he was little more than a hedge knight with a following of bandits. Arya read each message, scrawled her notes, and sent trusted envoys with promises of fair trade and mutual defense. "We keep the peace by showing strength," she told Davos, "but never by breaking our word." By evening, the city was alive with anticipation. Arya returned to the Red Keep and found the great hall draped in banners, lanterns hung from the rafters, trestle tables groaning with food. Sansa had outdone herself. Roast goose, lemon cakes, honeyed apples, and sweet wine from Dorne. The lords and ladies, the city council, even the poorest children from Flea Bottom had been invited, their faces shining in the candlelight. The night celebrations began with a song, an old melody from the north, sung by Sansa, her voice filling the hall with a hush more powerful than any command. Arya listened, her heart aching with memory, and when the song ended, she rose and spoke to the crowd. "King's Landing has seen too much pain," she said, her voice ringing clear. "We remember the cost of war, the price of silence, the danger of fear. Tonight we feast, not just for me, but for every soul who helped make peace possible. We are all of this city, old and new, noble and common, wolf and dragon, lion and rose." A cheer rose, echoing off the stone. Arya saw Gendry beaming at her, Sansa smiling with tears in her eyes, Davos lifting his cup. She felt the weight of all those watching, but also their trust, their belief. For a moment, she let herself believe it too. Later, when the food was eaten, and the music drifted into laughter, Arya slipped from the hall. She wandered alone through the gardens, the moon painting silver shadows across the grass. She stopped beneath the lemon tree, breathing in the scent, and let herself remember her journey. Winterfell and Harrenhal, the darkness in Braavos, the faces of those she had loved and lost. She spoke their names softly, a prayer to the night. She felt a presence behind her. It was Jon, his face half in shadow. "You don't have to carry it all, Arya," he said gently. "I know," she replied, "but I choose to." He smiled, and together they walked the quiet paths, remembering, dreaming, planning. "One day," Jon said, "maybe you'll let yourself rest." Arya shrugged, a spark of the old mischief lighting her eyes. "Someday, when every shadow is chased from this city." when every child has enough to eat, when every wolf comes home. They stood together beneath a lemon tree, the moon watching over them. And for the first time in years, Arya felt not alone, but woven into something vast and unbreakable. A city, a family, a story still unfolding. The weeks that followed were busy. Arya met with merchants from Old Town and Bravos, forging new alliances. She approved the construction of a great library in the city's heart, open to all, and named Samuel Tarley its first keeper. She traveled to outlying villages to see that justice was kept, once riding alone through a thunderstorm to aid a hamlet struck by fire. Her name grew beyond the walls, and in every market from Lannisport to Sunspear, small folk spoke of the Wolf Queen who remembered the forgotten. There were still threats, raiders from the Stepstones, whispers of old enemies returning. But Arya met each with steel and wisdom, never flinching, always listening. She trusted her counsel, but she also trusted her own eyes and the hard lessons of her youth. One spring evening, as the city celebrated the Festival of Lights, Arya climbed to the top of the Tower of the Hand. Below her, lanterns floated down the black water, tiny flames drifting into the darkness, each a hope carried by the city's people. She watched them until the last light vanished into night. Sansa found her there, a flask of sweet wine in hand. "You never rest," Sansa chided, though there was no real reproach. "Rest is for those who feel safe," Arya said. "But I'm learning." Sansa handed her the flask, and together they watched the city sleep, the peace they had forged holding firm. Arya's story was not finished. There were more dangers to come, more sorrows, more triumphs. But as summer settled over King's Landing and roses bloomed along the palace wall, she knew she had given her city more than justice or peace. She had given them a future, wild and unknown, fierce as a wolf's song in the night. And she had found, in herself and those around her, a reason to hope that it would endure. As the long summer unfurled over King's Landing, the city began to pulse with a new, earnest vitality. The air along the river was heavy with the scent of water lilies, the avenue of the Red Keep alive with petitioners, peddlers, and the laughter of children at play. The scars of war, though not fully healed, had faded from most walls, replaced by garlands of green and bright cloth, the handiwork of a city rediscovering its capacity for celebration. On the high towers, Arya's direwolf banner danced with the city's own, the sight so common that even the most stubborn noble no longer muttered about northern upstarts ruling the south. Each day, Arya moved through the city on foot, shunning the gilded litters and armed processions expected of a queen. It was her way of remaining real, and it was known that she would pause in the market to taste a vendor's new honey cake, stop by the river's edge to watch the boats with passing fishermen, or slip into the shadows to speak privately with the girls who ran errands between inns and counting houses. Where she went, gossip followed. When she'd vanished for a day and returned mud-spattered, the city was alive with stories. Arya had slain a highwayman on the Storm Road. Arya had eaten with the beggars beneath the Black Gate. Arya had helped deliver twins in Flea Bottom. Each tale was truer than a lie, but not the full truth. Arya gave no explanations, and the small folk, delighted, invented their own. In the council chamber, the tone was brisk and earnest. Davos Seaworth managed trade and shipwrights. Sansa handled correspondence and courtly politics. Alysanne oversaw the city's health. Gendry, when not among his forges, worked with Sir Tal and Jean Waters to keep the watch clean of bribes and the streets clear of violence. Arya listened, asked questions, and made decisions with a calm that sometimes surprised even herself. The small folk now sent their own delegates to the council, chosen by lot every moon's turn, and Arya's rule became rooted in these voices, as much as the old blood of Westeros. Sometimes it seemed almost easy, but the memory of danger never left Arya. She knew peace was a season, not a certainty. Word came from the west. Bandits, once scattered, were gathering under a red banner in the foothills of the Golden Tooth. The Vale's trade had slowed, and there were rumors of unrest among the mountain clans. In the south, a lord in Dorne refused the queen's new laws for fair rents, threatening to raise his banners in revolt. Arya heard each report in silence, then sent envoys, To the west, a letter and a purse of gold to encourage the loyal. To the Vale, a visit from Sansa. To Dorne, Arya herself rode, disguised as a merchant, to meet the Lord and learn his heart. She returned 10 days later, dusty and grinning. The Dornish banners lowered in peace. One morning, Arya stood in the solar beside Gendry, watching the sunlight slant over the city. His hands, strong and scarred, rested on the stone. "You never stop," he said. "Stopping is for the dead," Arya replied, only half in jest. "There's always another shadow." He looked at her, quiet for a long moment. "Do you miss the road?" She thought of the old days, waking to cold dew, always hungry, trusting only her wits and her sword. "Sometimes. But the city is a road too. There are new dangers here. I just wear a different face." He smiled, a softness in his gaze she had come to trust. "You could leave if you wished. No one would stop you." Arya shook her head. "Not yet. I'm not finished." Outside, preparations were underway for the Midsummer Festival. The city's main squares had been cleared and strung with lanterns, stalls erected for food, games, and competitions. Sansa had planned the event for weeks, insisting the city deserved joy as well as peace. Maester Samwell had organized readings and lectures for the children, and Gendry's smiths had forged a great bronze bell to be rung at midnight, its toll to mark the turning of the season and the memory of those lost. Arya wandered among the workers as they set up, offering advice, rolling barrels, listening to the stories of those she met. She found herself at the old city wall, watching a group of boys rehearse a play, The Wolf Queen and the Dragon Queen, a farce in which Arya herself leaped from the battlements to chase a Lannister spy through the gutters. Arya watched, hidden, laughing at her own wild legend. And when the play ended, she gave the lead actor a copper wolf as a token. "Keep telling the story," she whispered. "Just don't make it dull." At the height of festival, Arya walked the streets with Sansa and Gendry, their guards hanging back at a respectful distance. Everywhere there were music and bright banners. Sweet cakes. Children darting through legs. Couples dancing by torchlight. When the bronze bell was raised, Arya stood at the front and let her voice carry across the crowd. This city was built by many hands and saved by many hearts. We remember those who are gone, but we do not let sorrow rule us. Let this be a night for hope and for the lives we build together. Let no one say King's Landing cannot heal. Ben? She struck the bell herself, its deep note rolling out over the rooftops. For a long moment, the city stilled, then erupted in cheers. Arya felt the sound pass through her, a living thing, more real than any sword. Later, as the crowds thinned, Arya walked the quiet streets with Gendry. They passed the shuttered shops and sleeping houses, neither speaking. At the river's edge, Arya stopped. "You could go, if you wanted. There are no chains here." Gendry smiled. "Neither are there chains on you, but I choose to stay." They stood together until the moon set, silent, content. But not all was peace. Trouble brewed in the Vale. A would-be usurper had gathered mercenaries, claiming Arya's rule was against the old gods. Davos and Sansa counseled caution, but Arya sent a raven demanding a council at the Eyrie. She herself rode north, taking only Needle, a plain cloak, and a handful of trusted men. The journey was hard, rain turning the roads to rivers, mountain passes dangerous with falling stones and lurking thieves. In the high hall of the Eyrie, Arya faced the would-be usurper, a grim knight with cold eyes and a tongue sharp with prophecy. "You are no true queen," he accused. "You are a killer, a mask, a shadow in the halls of power." The Vale was built on honor, not secrets. Arya met his gaze, steady as winter stone. "And yet here I am, with no mask and no shadow. I brought peace, not by fear but by truth. If you think you can rule better, stand before the people and say so." The knight refused, his followers faltering when Arya opened the council to the Vale's freeholders. For the first time, voices beyond the highborn were heard in the Eyrie. And when Arya rode away, the usurper's banners were lowered in silence, replaced by the deer wolf and falcon together. Returning to King's Landing, Arya learned a new threat faced the city. Pirates harrying the trade ships, emboldened by rumors of a weakened crown. Gendry took a force downriver to deal with them, and Arya sent envoys to Bravos and Old Town to renew alliances. She met with merchants, promising fair tariffs and protection. In her absence, Sansa managed the city, Davos the harbor, Alysanne the health of the poor. The city stood, not on one ruler's strength, but on many. When Gendry returned, bruised and grinning, he brought more than news of victory. He knelt before Arya in the old godswood, a simple ring in his calloused hand. "I have nothing to give but my loyalty and my love," he said quietly. "Will you marry me, Arya Stark?" Arya knelt with him, laughter and tears mingling. "I never wanted to belong to anyone, but I'll belong with you." Their wedding was small, attended by Sansa, Jon, Davos, Alysanne, and the friends they'd made in peace and war. The people called it the Day of the Wolf and the Hammer, a joining not just of two hearts, but of the city itself, a pledge that hope, once found, would not be lost again. The seasons turned. Arya's reign deepened, rooted not in fear but in fairness, not in silence but in the voices of the many. She saw the city grow around her, children born, old wounds healed, new markets and gardens spreading out from the walls. Sometimes she walked alone at dusk, breathing the city's scents, river and earth, bread and lemon, iron and sweat. Sometimes she climbed to the top of the Red Keep and watched the lanterns drift over Blackwater, each one a promise. There would always be shadows. There would always be trials. But Arya was not alone, and her city was no longer afraid. On the anniversary of her coronation, Arya stood on the palace balcony with Gendry at her side, Sansa and Jon, Davos and Alysanne and Samwell gathered behind. The bells rang in the morning, the markets burst with flowers. The people called out their queen's name. Arya felt the wind on her face, the weight of hope and memory. For a moment she closed her eyes and was again a child in the godswood, learning to listen to the silence between the names. For a moment, she was the girl with needle, the wolf among shadows. Then she opened her eyes and saw the city she had helped make, bright as spring, alive as any wild place in the north. She lifted her hand in greeting, and the cheer that rose was fierce, boundless, unbroken. Arya Stark, queen not just of King's Landing but of a new age, smiled as the light broke over her city, her heart full of the promise she had fought so long to keep. Hope endured. Justice endured. The Wolf Queen's reign, like the seasons, would go on. Okay. The long summer burned itself out in a slow golden blaze, and autumn stole in on cool winds, scattering red and gold leaves across the courtyards and spires of King's Landing. Arya felt the shift in the air each morning as she watched the city from her high windows, the pale sun gilding the city's rooftops in a softer light, the shadows deepening as the days shortened. With every turning leaf, she was reminded that all things change, even peace, even hope. It was her duty now to shepherd the city and realm through these changes, to carry them through the darkness and into whatever came after. Arya's days were full. The business of a queen, never-ending petitions, council debates, meetings with delegates from Dorne, the Reach, and the Westerlands. Sansa, ever her sister and her hand, managed the growing influx of trade from the Vale and beyond, her calm wisdom smoothing over even the bitterest rivalries among the lords. Gendry, still blacksmith and master of arms, oversaw the city's watch, drilling recruits in the autumn chill and rooting out the last vestiges of the old corruption. Davos managed the fleet in the harbor, while Maester Samwell kept the city's records, watched for rumors of sickness or unrest, and wrote letters to every corner of the realm. King's Landing thrived, but Arya never let herself believe it was safe. She walked the city daily, sometimes alone, sometimes with Sansa or Gendry or Jon if he was in the city. She visited the dockside fishmongers, the stonecutters rebuilding the city wall, the orphanage in Flea Bottom where the children shrieked with laughter when she told stories of direwolves and dragons and her old wild adventures. At night, Arya often found herself walking the Red Keep's battlements, needle at her side, listening to the city's heart. It was a habit born from years of danger, But now the city was mostly quiet, save for the distant clamor of bells, the laughter from the inns, or the sweet, sad songs of the minstrels, who had come from every corner of Westeros to find new stories in the Queen's city. She would pause sometimes at the Godswood, standing before the pale heart tree transplanted from Winterfell's soil, whispering names to the old gods, her prayers a mixture of memory and hope. The city's autumn was not without challenge. Bandits still plagued the roads beyond the Blackwater, though fewer than before. Some of the old lords, wary of their waning power, began to gather quietly in their distant keeps, plotting ways to return to old games. The Faith, though cowed and chastened, still sought to influence policy from behind their marble walls, and the Iron Bank's envoys always pressed for debts to be paid, seeking to pull King's Landing back into the old web of coin and credit. Arya answered each challenge in her own way. For the bandits, she sent Gendry and a detachment of the City Watch, but she also sent offers of pardon and honest work for those willing to return to the city and labor on the new roads, bridges, and farms springing up around the capital. For the scheming lords, she sent invitations to court, public, cordial, impossible to refuse without revealing their intent. For the Faith, she granted audience in the open, before the city's eyes, and listened to their grievances, making her own promises of charity and justice, but never ceding ground to their old ambitions. For the Iron Bank, she paid each installment as agreed, using the surplus that careful rule and flourishing trade had brought to the realm. There were victories, and there were losses. Some bandits returned and became loyal, but others refused the olive branch, forcing Arya's hand. A skirmish near the ruins of Harrenhal saw the Wolf Queen's banners flying high, but 3 of her best men were lost. In the city, 2 children died of a sudden fever before Maester Samwell's new hospital could save them. Arya mourned each loss, refusing to let the city grow numb or cold. She ordered new wells dug, roads patrolled, more apprentices taken on at every guild. "We'll not leave anyone behind," she told her council, and she meant it. That autumn saw a council like none before it, held not in the Red Keep, but in the city's great amphitheater. Arya sat with Sansa and Gendry, Davos and Samwell, while small folk, merchants and lords all gathered to speak openly. There were debates about taxes, trade, and the new laws that guaranteed protection for orphans, small folk, and the newly freed. There was shouting, laughter, and even song. By the end, Arya saw in their eyes something rare: trust, and even pride. As the harvest drew to a close, Arya rode north with a small company, Jon, Sansa, Davos, and Gendry among them. She wanted the lords to see that the Queen's justice did not stay within the walls of King's Landing. They stopped at villages in the Riverlands and the Reach, hearing grievances, dispensing judgments, and celebrating harvests with the small folk. Arya sat by bonfires, told tales, drank cider, and danced with farmers and shepherds, her laughter carrying through the night. It was in these small moments that she felt most herself, neither queen nor legend, but simply Arya. On the journey home, they passed through the ruins of Harrenhal. Arya paused, the weight of old ghosts heavy in the shattered stone. She remembered the faces she had worn, the cruelties she had witnessed and survived. Now, standing among the ruins with Jon and Sansa, she promised herself that King's Landing would never be allowed to fall so low, that power would not again be won by blood alone. Back in the capital, the autumn festivals brought joy to the city. There were tournaments on the riverbanks, puppet shows in the market squares, and feasts open to all, where the queen herself poured ale and broke bread with the poorest of her people. Alysanne the healer organized a harvest fair, where children competed in races and the city's best bakers vied for the honor of crafting the Wolf Queen's pie, a concoction of apples and honey and late autumn berries, more sweet than any gold. Amid the celebration, Arya received word from the east. An envoy from Braavos had arrived, seeking audience. The envoy was a woman with sharp eyes and a hidden knife, who brought gifts of silk and glass, but more importantly, a letter from the Faceless Men. Arya met her alone, late at night in the Godswood, and heard the message, one she had expected, yet never truly prepared for. "You are remembered," the envoy said, "but you owe nothing. All debts are paid. You are free. Arya stared at her own hands, steady and scarred. Then, I choose to remain. The envoy smiled. That is why your story endures. With the envoy's departure, Arya felt another weight lift. She told no one. But the dreams that haunted her, of chasing shadows, of losing herself, faded a little after that night. As the weather cooled and the leaves turned, Arya spent more time in the Godswood with Gendry, who had become both partner and friend. Together, they planned the city's winter defenses, the next expansion of the granaries, and the new ships Davos would soon launch from the harbor. Sansa, growing more comfortable with her own role, assumed more and more of the daily work, freeing Arya for the moments that truly mattered, meeting a wounded soldier just home from the west, resolving a long-standing feud between two merchant families, comforting a child whose mother had died of fever. One evening, as the city settled into a hush, Arya joined Jon on the walls. The wind was cold, carrying the scent of wood smoke and distant rain. Jon stared out over the city, his eyes thoughtful. You've done well, Arya. Better than any of us expected. She shook her head. I'm only doing what has to be done. Jon smiled, that rare slow smile she remembered from Winterfell. You gave them something no king or queen has in 100 years, trust. They believe in you. That will last longer than fear. Arya watched the lanterns blink to life along the river. Fear comes back sometimes, but I won't let it rule here. Jon gripped her shoulder. Neither will I. As autumn waned, Arya faced new trials. Reports came from the north of wildlings raiding farms, and she wrote to Bran, now Lord of Winterfell, offering aid and counsel. In the city, an apprentice poisoned the wells of a rival guild, and Arya presided over the trial herself, ruling not with the sword but with hard, clear justice. Her name spread farther than before. Letters arrived from beyond the narrow sea, from Dorne, the Summer Islands, even distant Yeti, seeking alliances, trade, and knowledge. On the last night of autumn, the city gathered in the square before the Sept for the Festival of Remembrance. Arya stood with Sansa, Gendry, Davos, Samwell, and Jon, each of them lighting a lantern for someone lost. Arya thought of her father, her mother, Robb, Rickon, the many faces and lives she had carried and lost. She whispered their names to the wind as she set her lantern afloat on the river, watching the lights drift away, carrying their stories into darkness. As she turned to rejoin her friends, Arya felt something shift inside her. Not a loss, but a peace. She had come full circle, from the shadows of the old city to the heart of a new one. From a girl with a list of names to a queen with a city of them. Each life precious, each story worth telling. The moon rose over King's Landing, the river gleaming silver beneath the stars. Arya Stark, Wolf Queen, watched her city sleep, her heart certain that even as the world turned and changed, hope and justice would endure, written not in banners or laws, but in the lives she had helped shape and the peace she had fought to keep. And when the first chill of winter crept down from the north, the city was ready, not because of her alone, but because together they had learned to face the darkness and light alike, and to never surrender the dream of something better. Ka. The first frost of winter came with little warning, whispering along the black water before dawn, threading itself through the winding alleys and the open squares of King's Landing. Arya woke to find the garden beneath her window silvered, the lemon trees sparkling as if the city had been dusted with diamonds. She breathed in the cold, sharp air, and felt that old edge of vigilance stir within her. The knowledge that every season brought new tests, that peace was never truly finished, but something made again each day. In the council chamber, fires blazed in the hearths, and all wore cloaks or shawls. Sansa was reading a letter from the Vale. Her cheeks flushed from the chill. Gendry's hands were raw from training the city watch before sunrise. Maester Samwell's spectacles steamed up as he leaned over a folio, his voice carrying the latest tally of grain stores and coal for the city's hearths. Davos had just returned from the harbor, reporting that the last grain barge from the Riverlands was safely moored. There'll be hungry mouths in the months ahead, Sansa said, worry in her voice, though she tried to hide it. Arya met her sister's gaze and nodded. We'll not let the city go cold or hungry. We've survived worse. Bah. Davos grunted in agreement. "The people remember last winter's bounty, Your Grace. There's a trust now. No one hoards, no one riots. Not so long as the Wolf Queen keeps her promises." Arya allowed herself a faint smile at the title, but she knew the truth of it. Trust was more fragile than glass, easier to lose than gold. She turned her mind to the winter's work. The city soup kitchens would stay open, the watch would ensure fair measure at every granary, and new patrols would guard the outlying villages from bandits who might prey on those cut off by snow or swollen rivers. Gendry volunteered to ride north with one of the patrols. "I want to see how the roads fare outside the city, and the smiths in Southhorn need new tools." Arya squeezed his hand. "Take 6 riders. Bring back news." Then so. She had grown used to the rhythm of absence and reunion. Gendry was never far, but the city's business often drew them in different directions. Sansa would later tease her for the way her eyes lingered on him, but Arya would only laugh, used to her sister's gentle schemes and quiet matchmaking. When the council adjourned, Arya walked the halls of the Red Keep with Maester Samwell. He spoke of his hopes for the city's great library, nearly finished now, its shelves lined with volumes rescued from ruined castles and newly copied by students of every age and background. "There's a hunger for learning now, Your Grace. They come with their own questions, not just the ones their fathers taught them to ask." Arya grinned. "Questions are dangerous things, but I'll take them over silence any day." As the winter deepened, Arya's city drew close. Fires flickered behind every window, and the markets shrank to a few covered stalls where fishmongers and bakers sold their wares to men and women bundled against the cold. In the evenings, the taverns filled with laughter and music, the tales told and retold until they took on lives of their own. Arya listened to these stories when she could, smiling as children boasted that the Wolf Queen herself would chase away any monster, that the city would not starve so long as she walked its streets. She spent time in the soup kitchens, stirring cauldrons beside the same old cook who'd once hummed northern songs at dawn. There were still hungry children, still cold hands, but fewer than before. She visited the healers' halls with Alysanne, checking the sickbeds, promising extra wood for the poorest homes. Sometimes, she found time to sit with the orphans, teaching them to throw knives or recite the names of the kings and queens of old, though she always finished by telling them that the best history was the one they'd write themselves. Jon returned from the north just after the first heavy snow. He rode through the city gates with Ghost at his side. His cloak rhymed with frost, a rare smile on his lips as he embraced Arya. "Winterfell stands strong. Bran sends his blessing, and the wildlings have settled at the gift. Peaceful mostly. I wish you could see the new growth there, even under snow." Arya led him through the city, showing him the new library, the granaries, the old godswood thriving in southern soil. Jon listened, approving. At the evening feast, he spoke of the peace in the north, how the old hatreds were thawing, how hope had begun to take root in hearts too long ruled by fear. "You've done it here too, Arya," he said softly. "You gave them something better than war." As the weeks passed, Arya's court grew busier. The Dothraki horsemen sent by Daenerys in gratitude for Arya's justice arrived, causing a stir with their braids and their wild, fearless laughter. Arya welcomed them openly, assigning their strongest to train alongside the city watch, and sending the rest as envoys to Dorne and the Reach, strengthening the realm's ties in ways swords never could. Sansa worked with merchants to ensure the city's granaries never emptied, while Samwell's students taught the children to read by firelight in every neighborhood. It was not all triumph. Reports came from the Westerlands of a winter fever, and Arya sent healers and food, refusing to let old enmities determine who would live or die. One day, the bells rang for a fire in the southern market, and Arya was there with the watch, forming bucket lines, comforting the frightened. No one called for vengeance when a thief was caught looting the ruins. He was given bread and sent to help rebuild. A reminder to all that justice was not cruelty. Trouble came from the Iron Islands, where a pirate queen defied Arya's taxes and burned a trade ship in Blackwater Bay. The city panicked, but Arya sent Gendry and Davos with a fleet of new ships, their hulls clad in iron, and their decks manned by sailors loyal to the Wolf Queen. The battle was short and decisive. The pirate queen surrendered, brought before Arya in chains, and Arya listened to her story before passing sentence. You may never return to sea, but you will not rot in a cell. Take up work with the dock builders, teach them what you know. We waste nothing, not even our enemies. The city marveled at the mercy, and Arya felt the weight of it keenly. She knew the lesson. Mercy was the riskiest gift. But without it, the world would remain broken forever. One night, as frost crept along the garden paths, Arya sat with Gendry in the smithy, the fire painting them gold. "Do you ever wish we'd left for the far seas?" he asked, his hammer resting across his knees. Arya shook her head. "No. I had to see what the world could be when someone stood and stayed. Besides, someone has to keep you honest." He laughed, his voice deep and warm, and pulled her close. "You keep the whole city honest, Arya." She rested her head on his shoulder, feeling the comfort of belonging. Not just to him, but to the city itself. Winter pressed on, and the city endured. Arya spent her days at the council table, her evenings among her people. She sent food to the outlying farms, medicine to distant holds, and letters to every lord and freeholder, reminding them that the city's peace depended on the realms. The moot met again in the great amphitheater, and this time, the lords argued alongside the small folk, their voices loud, but their tone respectful. The year turned, and with it came the promise of spring. A thaw in the wind, buds on the trees, birds singing before dawn. Arya stood one morning on the city walls, watching the sunrise over the Blackwater. Sansa and Gendry at her side, Jon not far behind. The city was waking, the people moving with purpose and hope. For the first time in many years, Arya allowed herself to hope too. She had seen enough to know that shadows always waited, that old dangers sometimes wore new faces. But as the sun rose and the city's bells began to ring, Arya Stark, Wolf Queen, knew that justice and hope could be stronger than fear, and that what had been built here, together, might endure far beyond her own story. King's Landing was alive, not perfect, but whole. Arya closed her eyes for a moment, breathing in the cold, clean air, listening to the city's heart beating, her own heart echoing it, sure and strong, woven forever into the life she had helped create. Kamdi, Mondi. As the first winter's frost receded and King's Landing edged into another spring, the city seemed to draw its first true easy breath in years. Dawn found Arya standing in the old godswood, the heart tree's white bark gleaming in the blue light, and the ground beneath her boots soft with thaw. A few hardy snowdrops poked up near the roots, and she knelt to touch their petals, marveling that something so delicate could survive such cold. It was hope, stubborn and bright, taking root where blood and fear had so often claimed the ground. The city reflected that new resilience. Every morning, Arya made her circuit, across the gardens, through the kitchens, into the busy market squares where fresh greens appeared at last alongside the endless root vegetables of winter. People called her name as she passed, but not in fear. Sometimes in the lower city, the children would run after her laughing, tossing sprigs of wildflowers or apple peel. She always slowed for them, and often sent them home with extra bread or coins. The Wolf Queen's largesse was less a matter of policy than an old habit. She remembered too well the taste of hunger, the comfort of kindness from a stranger. The Red Keep, too, had changed. No longer a fortress of suspicion, it had become the living heart of the city. The courtyards rang with laughter from the students of Samwell's library and the children of the city's new school, while Sansa presided over a stream of visitors. Lords and ladies, merchants and inventors, old enemies turned uncertain allies. Sansa moved through the crowds with a queen's composure, her face as open as the spring sky, her voice gentle but resolute as she adjudicated land disputes, trade complaints, and invitations to feasts. Her steadiness made Arya's quicksilver judgments possible. The city knew both Stark sisters ruled, even if only one wore a crown. Maester Samwell's library had become a wonder not only of King's Landing, but of the realm. Scrolls from the Citadel and from distant Essos lined its shelves, and under Samwell's patient guidance, boys and girls of every birth learned to read. Even the youngest could recite the names of the rivers and mountains, the kings and queens of old, and, more importantly, describe the world as they saw it. In quiet corners, small folk and highborn alike pored over books, their voices hushed but eager. Knowledge was no longer the guarded secret of a few, but a gift for all. Arya's council met every afternoon in the solar, the long table bathed in golden light. Davos was first to speak, as always. His news of trade from the docks seasoned with a touch of sea salt and gruff humor. Gendry, scarred and stalwart, spoke for the city watch, for the smiths and laborers. Alysanne, now midwife to half the city and unofficial mistress of the healers, argued for the poor, her words fierce as any lord's. Sansa steered the talk, smoothing rough words, keeping the council's gaze on the horizon, not the past. Maester Samwell, eyes twinkling, gently corrected anyone who tried to twist a fact to fit their wish. Sometimes Jon was there, silent but intent, his presence a touchstone for Arya. On this spring day, the business was hopeful. The new waterworks in the South Quarter had held through the winter. The last sick beds of fever had emptied. Gendry reported a month without a single murder in Flea Bottom. There were challenges, as ever. 2 merchant houses at odds over the rights to a valuable pier. A restive lord in the Stormlands bristling over attacks on his salt. Whispers of new bandits in the Kingswood. Arya listened to all, weighing each with the sharp, instinctive sense for truth and motive she'd honed in the shadows. "We'll arbitrate the merchants' dispute in the open," she said. "Let the small folk see that law is for all. Send a letter to Lord Caron. I'll meet him myself and hear his complaint. As for the bandits, send word to the watch at Duskendale to patrol the forest, but also send a priest. Sometimes hunger breeds lawlessness, and mercy can feed a soul as well as bread." The council nodded. Arya noticed Sansa's approving smile and allowed herself a quiet satisfaction. As the meeting adjourned, Arya stepped out onto the balcony, watching the city below. The black water shone in the sun, busy with fishing boats and barges. Flags snapped on the new towers built along the docks, their colors bright. In the city's narrowest alleys, Arya saw market stalls bursting with spring greens, new-made cheeses, pies cooling on window ledges. She met Gendry in the smithy. He was forging new tools for the farmers. His hands blackened, but his eyes alight with purpose. "You know," he said, "they call you the Queen who walks." Arya raised an eyebrow, grinning. "Better than the Queen who hides, or the Queen who sits." He laughed. "You'd never sit still long enough. There's talk you're off to the Stormlands. Tomorrow at dawn. Sansa can manage the council for a week. I want the lords to know I hear their complaints, not just their praise." He nodded, pride clear in his gaze. "You're not like any ruler they've known." "Nor you," she said, tracing the scars on his knuckles. "Stay safe. Keep the peace." At midnight, Arya walked the silent halls of the Red Keep, her mind unsettled. In her solar she found Sansa, wrapped in a shawl and reading by candlelight. "You should sleep," Arya said softly. Sansa looked up, her face pale but calm. "I'll rest when you return." "Arya, you're doing well, but don't let the city become your prison." "Dinde." Arya considered that. "It's not a prison. It's a promise. To them. To myself. To you." They embraced, their bond stronger than words. At dawn, Arya set out for the Stormlands. The journey was swift, her company small. 2 trusted guards, a healer, and a priest of the 7. They rode through villages busy with planting, past fields where children played, waving to their queen as she passed. At Rainhouse, Lord Caron received her in a drafty hall, his face hard. "My men pay your taxes, yet my coffers bleed. I give food, yet my neighbors steal. What am I owed, Wolf Queen?" Arya listened to his grievances, her eyes sharp. "You are owed justice, but you owe justice too. Your people's loyalty cannot be bought or beaten. Meet with your neighbors, make peace over bread and salt, and I'll judge fairly. But if your folk go hungry while you feast, justice will find you." "Betty," Caron tried bluster, but Arya's steady gaze broke him. That evening, She sat at a long table with Charon and his rivals, hearing their quarrels until dawn. By the time she departed, peace was brokered. Fair taxes, shared fields, and a promise of aid for the poor. Arya left them to sort their own pride from true grievances. She knew the difference, and so did the small folk, who cheered as she rode away. Back in King's Landing, news came of pirates troubling the narrow sea. Arya dispatched Davos and a new fleet, their banners promising both mercy and steel. The pirates, finding the Wolf Queen's ships no easy prey, soon sent envoys to sue for peace and trade. In the city, Arya's reforms deepened. The guilds flourished, the moot grew, and the city's library saw new scrolls from Bravos, Lais, and even distant Korth. Children born of low birth now dreamed of learning. Not only labor, and girls as often as boys stood before Arya's court to plead for apprenticeships and training. It was in these small victories that Arya found her greatest joy. One evening, as the city's bells tolled sunset, she wandered through the gardens and found a group of children playing at swords. She joined them, laughing as she showed them tricks with sticks and nimble footwork. Later, she sat with them beneath the heart tree and told stories of Nymeria and her 1,000 ships, of brave lords and clever maids, of the days when she herself had been lost and found again by her family. Word of Arya's rule spread. In the west, a Lannister cousin sent a letter of gratitude for justice done by one of Arya's judges. In Dorne, the prince asked for her advice on ending a blood feud. From the north, Bran sent a raven with tidings of peace and a simple note: "You are remembered." Winter gave way to spring, and the city blossomed. Sansa's festival of first fruits drew merchants and minstrels from across the realm. Lanterns bobbed on the Blackwater, and Arya danced in the square, her laughter rising with the music. Gendry watched from the edge, pride and love plain in his eyes. At the feast's end, Arya stood before the city. "We are not finished," she said. "Each day we must choose justice, mercy, and hope. Let this be our promise to each other, that the wounds of the past will not fester, but heal, that every child here has a future brighter than any we have known." The crowd roared. Sansa stood beside her, Davos and Gendry and Samwell behind. The council that had built a city together, not by sword but by courage and care. As moonlight washed over King's Landing, Arya looked out across her city. A city no longer afraid, no longer broken. She thought of all the journeys that had brought her here, of the faces she'd worn and the lives she'd saved and lost. The Wolf Queen had found her place not in the shadows but in the light, where hope grew, wild and stubborn, as strong as winter, as bright as spring. And so Arya's reign endured, not flawless, never easy, but true. The city thrived, the realm remembered, and the name Arya Stark was spoken not just as legend, but as promise, as hope made real, for generations yet to come. Beneath a sky streaked with rose and amber, King's Landing awoke to a morning washed fresh by spring rains. The city gleamed as if newly made. Marble towers glistened, banners snapped in a brisk wind, and the streets bustled with more voices than Arya could count. On mornings like this, Arya rose with the sun and the bells, lacing her boots before the first call of the ravens. She found herself drawn to the highest parapet of the Red Keep, breathing deep the scent of wet stone, lemon blossoms, and wood smoke. Here, overlooking a city reborn, she felt the vastness of what she had built. Not only walls and streets, but trust, possibility, and a future wider than the Blackwater. It had been 3 years since she claimed the crown by exposing the traitors of the Old Order. And though the peace was hard-won and ever fragile, it was real. The city's wounds had healed into strength. Where once there was suspicion, there was pride. Where once was silence, there was song. Arya heard it in the voices echoing up from the markets. The women selling baskets of cherries and honeycomb. The fishmongers laughing at their own jokes. The children running in packs, no longer afraid of soldiers or hunger. Her day began in the kitchens, as always. She greeted the cooks and bakers, tasted the first loaf from the oven, listened to gossip, and pressed a coin into a scullion's hand for a story well told. By mid-morning, she was on the streets. Today's walk was through the riverside wards. New stone buildings, clean water running in open gutters, the little shrines rebuilt after the fire, and everywhere, the signs of a city learning to hope. She stopped to watch a scribe teach letters to a circle of children, their voices high as they stumbled over the shapes. Arya joined them, tracing words in the dust, and left them laughing as she recited lines from a bawdy song about a wolf who tricked a clever crow. In the council chamber, her small council awaited, and the air was thick with plans. Sansa, clear-eyed and regal, managed the lords and their ambitions. Davos reported on trade. Salt grain, spices from the summer islands, and on repairs to the river wall, battered by a winter flood. Gendry, never content to stay long indoors, brought news from the forges. New plows for the fields, fresh nails for shipwrights, the mince presses churning out coins stamped with the city's sigil, entwined with the direwolf. Alysanne had brought a delegation from the Healers' Guild, arguing for more midwives and clean birthing rooms in the poorer quarters. The business of ruling was never simple, but Arya took each challenge in stride. She listened to a petition from the Stonemasons' Guild about fair wages, resolved a dispute between two fishermen who had nearly come to blows over a boat's berth, and heard out an old man from the Street of Flower who wanted permission to build a shrine to the mother. She gave it gladly, telling him, "Let it be a place for all. The gods are many, and so are the people of this city." At midday, Arya dined with the council in the open court. Sun dappling the long tables, the city's finest musicians playing softly nearby. Here, Arya was simply herself. Queen's sister, friend. Gendry teased her about her lack of appetite. Sansa reminded her of tomorrow's meetings. Davos offered sly wisdom about when to bend and when to stand fast. After the meal, Arya donned her plainest cloak and slipped out alone, weaving through the city with the practiced ease of a ghost. She checked on the granaries, full and guarded, the ledgers neat. She watched the changing of the watch at the main gate, noted the discipline and pride of the young captain. In Flea Bottom, she stopped by the new infirmary, where Alysanne was teaching a row of girls how to set a broken arm. As dusk approached, Arya climbed the steps to the city's great amphitheater, the Moot Hall. It was here, under her rule, that the people met monthly to air grievances and debate new laws. The Moot was a place of noise and argument, where highborn and lowborn, free and former slave, all could speak. Arya never missed a session, sitting in the back as an equal, listening more than speaking, her presence a reminder that the city's fate was in every voice. Tonight, the Moot debated opening a new market near the river, a plan opposed by old merchants who feared losing their monopolies. Arya listened as a young woman argued that her father's shop had been ruined by high rents, and as a one-armed fisherman pleaded for a chance to start anew. In the end, Arya rose and spoke, her voice carrying across the benches. "We cannot build our future on fear. Every one of us came from somewhere else or lost something along the way. Let the new market be built, but let its first stalls go to those who have lost most and stood again. The city is not a gift. It is a promise made new each day." The Moot applauded, the motion passed, and Arya slipped out into the cooling dark heart light with the city's stubborn hope. Spring brought more than peace. Letters arrived from the north, from Bran at Winterfell and Jon on the Wall, full of news and questions and pride. From Dorne and Old Town came invitations to festivals, requests for Arya's wisdom on justice and peace. Even the Iron Islands sent a delegation, their envoy, an ironborn woman with salt in her hair and scars on her hands, offering gifts of fish and wool, and asking how the Wolf Queen kept the peace among so many. Arya answered with honesty, "I listen, I forgive, I never forget, and I keep moving, always." The festivals themselves were a marvel. For the first time in living memory, King's Landing hosted the great tournament of the realm. Knights and archers, bards and acrobats gathered from every kingdom, and for 5 days the city rang with laughter and the clash of arms. Gendry won the smith's contest with a sword of folded steel. Alysanne's midwives bested even the maesters in a riddle game. And Sansa, to Arya's glee, won a foot race against 3 lordlings. Arya herself joined the archers, competing with city children and lords alike, never revealing her full skill, but delighting in the sport and the camaraderie. On the last night, lanterns floated down the river, carrying wishes, hopes for a good harvest, for love, for peace. Arya watched from the water's edge, a cup of spiced wine in her hand, Gendry and Sansa at her side. "This is what we fought for," she whispered. "This, and all that comes after." But shadows still prowled at the city's edge. Bandits troubled the roads to Duskendale, and Arya rode out with the city watch, dealing with the threat swiftly, showing both mercy and resolve. In the west, word came of a would-be pretender, but when Arya sent envoys with offers of clemency and a seat at the moot, he laid down his arms, his followers welcomed into the city as equals. There were trials, a bad harvest in the North Quarter, a sickness that swept through the river wards, an accident at the harbor that took 5 lives. Arya mourned each loss, but she did not falter. She worked beside the healers, stood vigil with the grieving, and made sure the city remembered that justice was not only law, but love. In time, even the old lords came to respect her rule. The city's lords and councillors gathered in the Red Keep, debating new codes and trade routes, sometimes grumbling, sometimes laughing, but always returning to the truth that King's Landing was no longer ruled by fear. On Arya's name day, the city feasted from dawn until the stars came out. Lanterns hung from every window, cakes and honey flowed through the streets, and 1,000 voices sang the song of the Wolf Queen, the tale of the girl who had walked in darkness and brought the dawn. That night, Arya stood at the highest window with Gendry's arm around her, looking out over her city, her heart full and fierce. "This is yours as much as mine," she said. "No," Gendry replied softly. "It belongs to itself now. And you gave it that." In the months that followed, Arya's name became a watchword across Westeros. She sent aid to the Riverlands, helped end a feud in Dorne, and corresponded with queens and princes in distant lands. The Moot became a model for other cities, the library a beacon for all who wished to learn. The city was not without challenges, but Arya met them all, never shrinking, always walking forward. One evening, as spring deepened into summer and the first roses opened along the palace walls, Arya walked the Godswood alone. She knelt at the heart tree, closed her eyes, and whispered the names of those she had loved and lost. For a long moment she was a girl again, wild and untamed, with nothing but a sword and her name. Then she rose, brushing her hands on her skirts, and walked back into the light, ready for whatever new season would bring. King's Landing stood strong, its people unafraid, its hope enduring. Arya's reign would be remembered not for its splendor or its conquest, but for its courage, its justice, and the quiet, stubborn joy that grew each day in the city that had once seemed beyond saving. And as the bells rang and the sun rose on another morning, Arya Stark, the Wolf Queen, smiled, knowing that the story and the promise would go on. Early summer came to King's Landing with a gentler hand than anyone remembered, the sun dappling the city with shifting light and warmth that seemed to bring the very stones to life. Each morning, as the city woke, Arya wandered the quiet corridors of the Red Keep, drawn to the gardens where lemon trees bloomed and bees drifted among the new roses. The city was hers now, no longer as a conqueror or an avenger, but as a keeper and a builder, and she wore that role with a comfort that would have startled the girl she'd once been. In the Red Keep's great hall, shafts of golden sunlight pooled on the flagstones as Arya's council assembled. Sansa presided at the head of the table on mornings when Arya rode out early, her voice calm, her words deft, soothing the nerves of fractious lords and the ambitions of new merchants. Gendry arrived fresh from the smithies, his arms streaked with soot, bringing news of the forges and the city's defenses. Davos was often at the docks, but when present, he regaled the room with tales of storms and foreign ships. his laughter chasing away any shadows that lingered from old wounds. Arya preferred to begin her days among the people. She ate bread with the bakers as ovens cooled, checked the city's water wells, listened to dockhands argue over shares of saltfish. She walked the length of the city walls in the sunrise, boots scuffing old stones as she spoke with watchmen and merchants, asking after their families and their fears. At the temple steps, she found children tossing pebbles, daring one another to ring the great bronze bell. She joined their games, laughing and slipping coins into small hands, telling them to share the winnings with their mothers. There was no disguise anymore. Arya Stark, Queen, was known by every face. She could not vanish, but she had no desire to. The small folk, once wary, now called greetings or blessings, some shy, others bold. The Wolf Queen had become a living symbol of a city that had chosen to be unafraid. The city itself was vibrant and restless. Spring's festivals had given way to market fairs and open-air concerts. The squares thronged with traders from the Reach and Dorne. Boats from Bravos and Pentos moored in the bay, their hulls heavy with goods and rumors. Lanterns hung from every archway, and the scent of grilling fish and sweet cakes mingled with the flowers and river air. Arya delighted in the chaos, and whenever she found a musician or juggler performing for coins, she stopped to watch, pressing a silver piece into each outstretched hand. The moot met twice a month in the amphitheater, its benches filled with commoners and craftsmen, sailors and stewards, who debated the city's future. On these days, Arya was only another voice, listening as a guildsman argued for more rights, or a seamstress begged relief from taxes. She took pride that the loudest arguments ended in laughter, and that even the most stubborn lords learned they could not rule by decree alone. Yet peace was a thing made, not given. Arya knew better than most that darkness lingered at the edge of every firelight. Bandits in the Crownlands were scattered but not gone. The faith of the Seven pressed constantly for influence, their sermons hinting at divine order, even as they cloaked their ambition in piety. A minor lord in the west, cousin to the old Lannisters, made noise about rebellion, though Arya answered it not with threat, but with an invitation to visit her court, to see the city's new justice with his own eyes. Her greatest challenge came not from enemies, but from the city's old wounds. Flea Bottom still bore scars from the wars, too many orphans, too many who remembered hunger. Arya sent coin and grain, but more importantly, sent hope. Guild apprenticeships for the oldest, teachers for the youngest, and healers for all. The city's new library hosted evening readings and open lessons. Maester Samwell, beaming with pride, declared it the greatest gathering of free learning in 100 years. One afternoon, Arya joined Alysanne at the healer's hall, tending to a sick woman and her 3 children. Arya changed bandages, carried water, and whispered encouragement, remembering how her mother had cared for the wounded at River Run. When she left, the woman pressed a single daisy into Arya's palm, a wordless blessing. Arya wore it behind her ear for the rest of the day. Jon returned that evening from Winterfell, traveling with a small retinue of free folk and northern bannermen. He was older perhaps, but not diminished, his eyes keen, and his voice gentle as ever. Together, Arya and Jon walked the city walls, speaking quietly of the north and south, of family and forgiveness. "You've made a home for them here," Jon said, gazing out at the city's lights. "For yourself too, I think." Arya watched the dusk settle on the rooftops. "I never thought I'd belong anywhere again. I thought belonging meant chains. But I was wrong." Jon smiled, pride and sorrow mingled in his expression. "I know what you've given up, Arya." "I haven't given up anything," she replied. "I've made something. That's more than I ever hoped for." News from the rest of the realm was mostly good. Grain stores were full, the roads patrolled and safe, trade humming. The new city charter, ratified by moot and lords alike, was being copied in Old Town and White Harbor, other cities now sending delegates to learn from Arya's model. In Dorne, the prince wrote of ending the last of the blood feuds. In the west, the stubborn Lannister cousin returned home, his rebellion evaporated after seeing Arya's court. Summer was not without sorrow. A fever swept through the city, killing dozens before Alysanne's healers and Samwell's scholars traced its source and ended it. Arya was everywhere. At the sickbeds, in the council, on the docks directing quarantines, and at the funerals. She spoke little, but her presence was enough. Grief was shared, and no one was left alone. In the aftermath, Arya redoubled efforts to clean the city's water, and Sansa organized more soup kitchens and orphanages. The city mourned, then healed, scars deepening the bonds of the new peace. Arya's wedding to Gendry was simple, the ceremony held beneath the heart tree in the Godswood, attended by family and friends, small folk and council alike. Sansa wept, Jon smiled, and Davos gave a blessing in the tongue of the narrow sea. The city rejoiced for a week, feasting and dancing. "We're wed to the city, as much as to each other," Arya told Gendry with a grin as they stood watching the lanterns float across the river, her hand warm in his. "May it be a long, wild marriage." Their partnership was more than love. It was trust, shared purpose, a belief that hope was worth the cost. Together, they planned the city's defenses, improved the forges, created jobs and homes for the city's poorest. Their evenings were spent in laughter or comfortable silence, sharing bread in the kitchens or walking the gardens under moonlight. As the weeks passed, Arya's rule grew ever stronger, not through fear or force, but through example. She answered every letter, heard every grievance, and reminded her council that justice belonged to all, not only to the old names or the new. She encouraged Sansa's Festival of Lights, where every citizen, high and low, set a candle afloat on the black water in memory of lost loves and dreams yet unfulfilled. Each flame was a promise. The city would remember, and would not return to darkness. The moot grew in stature, drawing visitors from across Westeros and beyond. One summer evening, a delegation from Braavos arrived. Traitors and healers, two faceless men among them, eyes inscrutable but respectful. Arya welcomed them with open hands, her own history unspoken but never forgotten. They shared tales and knowledge, forging bonds of peace, and the Braavosi left gifts of glass, silver, and a rare book of legends for the library. Arya's nights, when free of duty, were spent with those she loved. She played at swords with the children of Fleabottom, hunted with Jon in the Crownlands woods, read poetry with Sansa, or sat in the smithy with Gendry as he hammered out a new creation. The city became not just her responsibility, but her joy, her home. Yet always, Arya watched for signs of unrest, for whispers of the old ways returning. She walked the city in disguise, testing the people's mood. What she found, more often than not, was contentment, a pride in work well done, in a city where justice and mercy lived side by side. She knew peace was a fragile thing, and never let herself become complacent. But hope, she had learned, was not a fool's dream. It was the hardest work, and the most enduring. On the longest day of summer, the city held a feast to mark the solstice. Lanterns lined every street, and music echoed from the walls to the riverside. Arya stood on the steps of the Sept and spoke to her people, of the journey from darkness into light, of the cost of peace, of the need to choose kindness and courage again and again. "We have come far, and we have farther to go," she said, her voice carrying over the crowd. "But I have seen your hearts, and I trust you. This city belongs to all of us. Let us write its story together, day by day." A roar of approval swept the square, and Arya, the Wolf Queen, smiled through tears, knowing that in this moment, the promise had been kept. The sun dipped low, and Arya stood with her family. Sansa, Jon, Gendry, and all the friends she had gathered in war and peace, watching the city shimmer in the golden light. The bells rang, the music rose, and the people of King's Landing danced beneath the stars, fearless and free, in the city that Arya Stark had remade not with sword or shadow, but with hope that refused to die. And as the moon climbed, Arya looked to the future, heart full, ready for whatever dawn might bring. The story would go on, and in every new chapter, the Wolf Queen's legacy would shine. A city brave enough to love and bold enough to last, no matter what darkness waited beyond the walls. The summer nights in King's Landing were thick with the mingled scents of honeysuckle and river water, laughter spilling from taverns, music tumbling down crooked alleys. Every window was open to catch the breeze off the black water. Arya often wandered through the city as the bells tolled midnight, moving unseen in plain clothes, her hood loose over cropped hair. The city had changed, but Arya never let herself forget what it was to be small, to be unseen, to be hungry in the shadows. She watched, always, pausing to listen to the stories told by fishwives and farriers, stepping into the candlelit warmth of a scribe's shop, where children wrote poems for pennies, watching apprentices laugh around their master's table. Sometimes, slipping past the wine-slowed city watch, she would settle on a rooftop to listen as old men played tiles and debated the merits of past queens and kings. Her name was often on their tongues. Arya the Just, the Wolf Queen, the girl who came back. She heard the pride in their voices, but also the expectation, the hope that she would keep the city from slipping back into the old blood-stained ways. On one such night, Arya joined Gendry in the smithy, sweat gleaming on his brow as he pounded a glowing blade. He grinned at the sight of her, pausing to pour water over his arms. "You know, half the city thinks you never sleep." "Half the city's right," Arya replied, smirking. She wiped her hands and bent over the worktable, watching sparks fly. "There's always something that needs watching." Gendry set down his hammer. "Or someone. You taught them to trust, Arya. Now they trust you'll never look away." She touched his arm. "No queen ever really sleeps, not if she cares about what happens in the dark." He nodded, leaning close, and together they watched the fire die down. Dawn brought new business. The council chamber bustled, Sansa reading reports, Davos relaying news of a merchant ship from Myr, Alysanne consulting with Samwell over an outbreak of cough in the North Quarter. Arya sat at the head, listening, asking questions, catching every nuance. No plea was too small. No voice went unheard. When a farmer begged help after a fire, Arya sent coin and men to rebuild. When the grain guild demanded higher prices, she had them meet with the Moot smallfolk, who laid out the cost of every loaf. Compromises were struck, and for every winner there was some balm for the loser. The Moot itself grew in ambition and authority. Delegates arrived now from Lannisport, Old Town, and even Dorne, seeking advice, sometimes seeking to join. Arya welcomed them, insisting that every law and charter be spoken in plain language. Every vote open to the gaze of all. She sat quietly at the back, Gendry or Sansa at her side, watching the debates. The city's voice was no longer a murmur of fear, but a roar of pride. That season, Arya's reforms deepened further. A new code of justice was ratified, a fair trial for every soul, regardless of coin or birth, with judges chosen from both lords and commoners. Samwell's library opened a night school for adults, and Gendry smiths trained new apprentices regardless of name or gender. In the Crownlands villages, Arya sent midwives and healers, breaking the hold of old lords who had profited from pain. Word of this new order reached even the distant corners of the realm. Bran sent letters from Winterfell, praising Arya's boldness and inviting her wisdom on matters of river management and wildling rights. Daenerys, in distant exile, wrote to Arya of justice and mercy, her tone warmer than Arya ever expected. The Iron Islands sent a delegation seeking trade, and Arya welcomed them with salted bread. Remembering her father's lessons, no old enemy so great that peace could not be offered. Yet not all was settled. One humid evening, Sansa brought troubling news. Rumors of a conspiracy among several old houses, nobles uneasy with the commoners' growing voice. Arya met with her council in the gardens, torchlight flickering in the trees. "Let them gather," she said. "Let them speak. Invite them to the Moot. Seat them at my table. I want their fears in the open, not festering in the dark." It was a gamble, but Arya had learned that the surest path to revolt was to shut out the dissenters. When the would-be conspirators appeared in court, they found not a queen to intimidate, but a council of equals, their every word recorded by scribes, their proposals debated by lords, merchants, and the small folk alike. The sunlight of scrutiny scattered most of their schemes, and when one plot was uncovered, Arya offered clemency in exchange for service. Send their sons and daughters to work in the city's orphanage and hospital, to see firsthand the lives they would rule. Some refused, but most accepted. The city watched and remembered, and trust, once broken, was pieced together again. Midsummer arrived, marked by the great fair of lanterns. Lanterns floated from the castle to the docks, bobbing on the water in memory of the dead and in hope for the living. Arya walked among the crowds, Gendry and Sansa at her side, shaking hands, listening to stories, laughing with children. Alysanne hosted a birthing contest. Who could swaddle a squirming baby doll fastest? And Arya nearly won, undone only by a laughing midwife's clever trick. That night, Arya spoke before the city, her voice steady and unadorned. We have made something new here, but it will not last if we do not protect it together. Justice is not finished. Hope is not easy. Every day, every hand, every heart matters. The city cheered, and Arya felt the power of their faith in her. A mantle heavier and finer than any crown. She met the eyes of her council. Sansa's quiet pride, Gendry's stubborn devotion, Davos' unwavering loyalty, Samwell's gentle wisdom. Together, they had turned the wheel, and together, they would keep it turning. That summer also saw the first meeting of the Greater Moot, where lords and small folk from all Westeros gathered. For 3 days the city was filled with banners and pageantry, but also with honest debate. Arya presided, guiding discussion but never dictating, insisting on compromise, on mercy, on the recognition that every family, every child mattered. She saw at last a vision of the realm where no one need kneel in fear. In the quiet after, Arya walked the Godswood, listening to the leaves in the night wind. She thought of all she had lost and all she had found. For the first time, she allowed herself to dream beyond her own reign. Of a city, a kingdom, a world where justice was not an accident, but a right, where the lessons carved in blood were never forgotten. She knelt at the heart tree, whispered her thanks and her promises, and rose to find Gendry waiting, a lantern in his hands. You should rest, Arya. She smiled, taking the lantern. Someday, when I know the city can stand without me. Men know. He drew her close, their foreheads touching, lantern light dancing across their faces. You've given them the best of you. You've given them each other. Dawn found Arya and Gendry sitting atop the city wall, legs dangling over the stones. The city below began to stir, bakers lighting ovens, sailors untying moorings, children chasing each other through the dewy grass. Arya watched it all, her heart swelling with the familiar ache of love and duty. There would be other seasons, other storms. Shadows would come, as they always did. But for now, hope endured, fierce and bright as the rising sun. King's Landing was alive, and Arya Stark, the Wolf Queen, was at its heart. A ruler, a sister, a friend, a legend, and above all, a promise kept. And as the city's bells rang in the new day, Arya whispered a vow to herself, and to all those who had walked the long road with her. We are not finished. We never will be. This story is ours to write, together, for as long as there is breath and will and hope in this wide, wild world. Ka. The season turned at last, late summer heat breaking in a night of thunder that rattled the high windows of the Red Keep, and sent fat droplets pounding on slate roofs from the Grand Sept to the waterfront. In the morning, the city gleamed, washed clean. Mist rolled off the black water, softening the stones of new houses rising where burnt tenements had stood. The lemon trees in Arya's gardens were heavy with gold and green, their scent blending with that of rain-wet earth and the faintest trace of sea. Arya stood by the Godswood's heart tree at dawn, her hand resting on the rough, pale trunk. Each year, the tree seemed to thrive more, the roots reaching deeper, the branches broader. She drew strength from it, as she did from all the stubborn things that had survived storm and sword and fire. She thought of her family in the north, Bran's quiet, owl-eyed wisdom, Joan's rare, warm letters, Sansa's patient labor at her side. She thought of Gendry sleeping in their rooms above, and the city, sprawling and waking, that she loved as fiercely as any blood. She was not alone for long. Sansa joined her, a cloak around her shoulders, her hair unbound. They stood together in silence as the sky turned from gray to blue. They said in council last night that the markets will be flush with fruit. Sansa said quietly. "The new fields are feeding half the city. You made that happen." Arya smiled. "We did. But it isn't finished. Nothing ever is." Sansa squeezed her hand. "That's what makes it last." "Shall we begin?" They walked together through the gardens, past rows of herbs, then into the Red Keep. The keep was never silent now. Maids rushed by with fresh linens and flowers. Guards in dire wolfen city blue stood at every turn. The council table was already busy when Arya and Sansa entered, Davos reading letters from distant ports, Gendry consulting with Samwell over a new irrigation plan, Alysanne the healer, tallying supplies and planning the coming winter stock. Arya took her seat at the table's end, as she always did. No dais, no throne, just a high-backed chair, the same as the others. She listened to Davos news of a grain ship run aground and to Sansa's update from the Moot. The city wants a new granary, and the small folk want a say in where it's built. Gendry reported on progress at the forges, and Samwell read a letter from White Harbor, Lady Manderly herself praising Arya's new law protecting orphans and refugees. The talk turned to less welcome news. 3 merchant houses had petitioned for more influence over the city's taxes. A septon in the northern quarter preached that Arya's laws threatened the old ways. A handful of old lords still tried to stir discontent, their words finding fewer eager ears with each passing month. Arya weighed each problem. The merchants may send a representative to the Moot, like anyone else. Their trade is valued, but their voice must be earned. As for the septon, invite him to supper. Let him see the city we've built. Let him speak his mind, but let him listen too. Mender whined. When council ended, Arya and Alysanne visited the healer's quarters, overseeing plans for a new birthing house. The old apothecary had finally yielded to Arya's insistence that women be trained in every aspect of care, and now a dozen girls in blue linen robes learned beside the city's best midwives. Arya sat in on a lesson, watching the girls' eager faces, the way they pressed questions and laughed at mistakes. "You'll deliver more hope than any lord ever has," Arya told them, and the girls flushed with pride. The day was full. A meeting with Riverland's traders at the harbor, a walk through the lower city to check on street repairs, then an hour with Samwell in the library, as he explained his plan for a great book of laws and stories. One that would include the lives of small folk, not only the deeds of law. That evening, Arya dined in the old servants' hall, surrounded by guards and cooks, and the quiet chatter of children orphaned by war. She ate bread and stew, traded jokes with the baker, and let a scullery boy braid her hair for luck. At the end of the meal, Arya told a story from her day's wandering. Of the mummers' troupe who taught her to juggle, of a kind girl in Bravos who showed her how to find the best bread with only a sniff, of her journey home. "I was lost," she finished, "but each kindness brought me closer to where I belonged. You're never alone if you remember that." Supper ended with laughter and song, Arya's presence a balm. She walked back through the city as the lamps were lit, stopping to speak with the night watch, to greet an old woman who swept her stoop, to cradle a sleepy child whose mother worked late in the spinning house. Back in her chambers, Arya found Gendry waiting, a smudge of oil on his jaw. He handed her a small box, rough carved. Inside was a new knife, smaller than needle, its hilt inlaid with the direwolf and the city's sigil entwined. "For the next girl who needs it," he said, and Arya hugged him fiercely. That night, a storm rattled the city again, but Arya slept soundly, dreamless and certain. When she woke, Sansa was already at her desk, writing letters to the north. Joan's raven had come at dawn, bringing news of peace with the wildlings and a wedding plan for spring. The next weeks were busy, the days stretching into cool, fragrant evenings. Arya attended moot after moot, each debate growing more lively, more hopeful. The small folks' voices rang clear. They demanded a new bridge across the Blackwater, more healers in the West Quarter, better schooling for their children. Arya listened to every word, promising nothing lightly, but always answering. The city changed as summer faded. The new bridge began, the river alive with boats and laughter. The markets swelled with fruit and salted fish. Lanterns bloomed along the streets in memory of the dead and in hope for the living. Maester Samuel's students staged a play, acting out the story of the Wolf Queen and the city she saved. Arya sat in the crowd, hiding a smile as a fierce girl played her part, sword in hand, fearless and wild. Autumn crept in. The air grew crisp, the leaves in Arya's gardens turning red and gold. A harvest festival filled the city with music and dancing. The Wolf Queen joined in, tossing apples and leading the children in a wild, stomping reel. Gendry, grinning, tried to keep up, and Sansa clapped along from the sidelines. That season, a new threat loomed. Ships from the east sighted in the narrow sea, rumored pirates and sell sails gathering. Arya convened council, sent Davos and a fleet to parley, and rode the city walls at dawn and dusk. Her gaze sharp, her manner calm. She trusted her people and her preparations. King's Landing was ready, not because it feared the world, but because it had learned to hope in the face of every storm. The pirates, when they came, found not a city cowering but one united. The city's fleet, captained by Davos, crewed by small folk and lords' sons alike, met them at sea, turning them back with cunning and resolve. Arya welcomed the survivors who surrendered, giving them work and a chance to start anew. It was justice but also mercy. The city understood and approved. Winter neared. The first snow fell softly over the godswood, blanketing Arya's heart tree, dusting the palace walls. She walked the city in her old cloak, feeling the cold, hearing the bells, watching the people move with purpose. The city had not forgotten hunger, but it did not fear it now. Arya saw bread in every window, heard laughter in the alleyways, watched children run free across the square. On the year's last night, Arya stood atop the Red Keep with Sansa, Gendry, and Davos. The city below shimmered with lanterns, the river glowed gold. Bells rang in the old and the new, and Arya raised her hand in salute. "We did this," Sansa said softly. "We all did," Arya replied, her heart full. A hush settled over the city as midnight struck. Arya breathed in the cold, clear air, and felt the truth in her bones. This peace was real, not a dream, not a story, but a future won and made and held, day by day, by every hand and every voice. King's Landing endured. Arya Stark, Wolf Queen, watched her city greet the new year with hope undiminished, her own story woven now into the living heart of a people who believed that justice could last, that mercy could heal, that tomorrow would always be worth the struggle. She would walk with them into every dawn, knowing that nothing was ever finished, but everything was possible. Winter's breath lingered long in the city, but it was a winter transformed. No longer the chill of fear, but a season of togetherness. Wood smoke curled from every chimney, mixing with the scent of baking bread and stewed apples. In the Wolf Queen's time, cold was met with welcome. The city's granaries opened their doors to the hungry, hearths were shared, and not a soul went unclothed or unsheltered. Arya walked the avenues in a plain blue cloak, Gendry's new blade at her side, the dire wolf and city sigil in her clasp. No guard trailed her steps. It was the way she had always wished to rule. In the council chamber, the talk was of winter and what came after. Davos and Samwell managed the city's stores with relentless care, calculating how much flour could be spared each week, how many cords of wood were left before the thaw. Alysanne reported the health of the city. No fever, fewer coughs, clean water from the new cisterns. Sansa brought letters from the Riverlands, thanks for grain sent in time, an invitation to the spring fairs, questions about the moot. The moot itself was now the pulse of King's Landing. Delegates from every district, chosen by lot, brought grievances and hopes. No voice was mocked or dismissed. Arya sat in the circle as an equal, her questions gentle but searching. When an old baker complained of unfair taxes, Arya sent Sansa and a counselor to review the ledgers and walk his street. When a stonemason spoke of dangerous scaffolds, Gendry was there at dawn to inspect. And new safety rules were passed that day. The city's new laws, written in Samwell's clear hand, were copied and posted at every crossroads. Justice in plain words, rights and responsibilities for every citizen. Punishments clear but measured. There were no secret courts. The only executions were rare and solemn, each with a hearing before the moot and a chance for mercy. Most crimes, thievery, debt, violence, were met not with death, but with restitution, with labor to repair what had been harmed. Even the lords, grumbling, found it difficult to argue when they saw the order that grew from the new ways. Children thrived as they never had. In every ward there was a school now, taught by scholars and apprentices who had once been the city's lost and hungry. The library had doubled in size, lantern light glowing from its windows deep into the night. Books in the common tongue, histories and tales of distant lands. Arya's legacy was knowledge as well as justice. Sansa's poetry readings filled the great hall with laughter and song, and even the most stubborn goldcloaks came to listen, hearts softened by the music and the warmth. Arya's mornings began with the city, tasting porridge at the soup kitchens, watching the bakers shape loaves, laughing with children playing at swords in the square. She listened to every story. Once, a girl showed Arya a bruise on her arm. Her uncle's doing. By that evening, the girl and her siblings were in a safe house, and the uncle working the night shift on the sewers, learning the value of clean water and hard labor. Her afternoons belonged to the council or to the moot, but Arya often slipped away to the city walls, walking the perimeter, watching the ice melt on the Blackwater. There she found Gendry more often than not, boots muddy, hair wild. Together, they'd talk of plans, new bridges, a larger smithy, a granary shaped like a tower to save space. Sometimes they just sat in companionable silence, her head on his shoulder. The city stretched below them like a promise. Gendry's forges never rested. The smiths made more than swords now. Plows, hinges, clockwork toys, tools for the new builders and farmers. The sound of hammer on anvil rang as music to Arya, the rhythm of renewal. She took time every week to visit the apprentices, especially the girls, who showed off their work with pride. Joan's letters from the north arrived with the first crows of dawn. Winterfell was quiet, Bran steady as a star, the wildlings content. Arya missed him fiercely, but knew her brother's happiness was as real as her own. The north sent wood, wool, and stories for the library. In return, Arya City sent glass, cloth, and the newest volume of the laws, inscribed with Bran's name alongside hers and Sansa's. In the west, the last Lannister holdouts surrendered to peace, their banners replaced by the Wolf and City, their children sent as guests to King's Landing to learn trade, healing, and the language of the moot. From the Reach, Lady Margaery Tyrell visited in early spring, her retinue bright as a garden. Margaery and Arya walked the new embankments together, watching children skip stones and lovers stroll. "You've changed them, Arya," Margaery said, smiling. "But you've changed yourself too." Arya thought of the girl she'd been. Fierce, hungry, always running. "I've learned the cost of not changing," she answered, and Margaery's eyes glistened with understanding. That spring, the moot voted to abolish the last of the city's debtor prisons, replacing them with a system of service and apprenticeship. Arya signed the law with a flourish. Her words met by cheers in every square. Sansa composed a song for the day, and the whole city sang it, the refrain echoing from the Red Keep to the river. Challenges never ceased. An outbreak of fire in the Haymarket, doused by Gendry's new water wagons. A dispute between two trading families, resolved by open debate and a binding vote. Rumors of pirates quelled by Davos' careful diplomacy and swift, decisive patrols. There were moments of loss. An old scribe who died of fever. A boy lost to the river ice. But each sorrow was met by the city, not suffered alone. Arya's marriage to Gendry was the heart of her happiness. They shared burdens, laughter, and silence. Their lives braided as tightly as the city's fate to its queen. Gendry's love was simple and steadfast, the counterweight to Arya's restless spirit. On long evenings they walked the gardens together, planning not only for the city, but for the children they hoped would come. Children who would never know the fear and hunger Arya had known. In late spring, as the first green buds unfurled, and the city's walls dripped with rain, Arya stood in the godswood with Sansa and the council, reading aloud the latest charter of rights, freedom of worship, fair trade, and the promise that no law would be written in secret. Every word, every line was cheered by those assembled, the sound carrying across the city a banner invisible but stronger than any stone. The Moot's greatest achievement came when a delegation arrived from across the sea, envoys from the free cities, seeking knowledge of King's Landing's new laws, eager to learn from the city once known only for its corruption and cruelty. Arya welcomed them with open hands, arranging for debates and lessons in the library and the Moot. The visitors marveled at the Council of Equals, the peace in the streets, the laughter in the taverns, the learning in the schools. When they left, Arya watched their sails disappear down the river, knowing the world had changed, not by conquest, but by example. On the longest day of spring, the city held a festival of lanterns. Every soul, high or low, sent a candle on the river, each flame a hope for the year to come. Arya walked among the crowds with Gendry and Sansa, their hands clasped, their hearts full. Children wove flowers into Arya's hair, and she let them, laughing. As darkness fell, the city glowed with thousands of drifting lights, and Arya, standing with her family, whispered thanks to the old gods and the new. "We've done well," Gendry said, voice rough with pride. "We're not finished," Arya answered, "but we are together, and that is enough." As the city slept, Arya stood again by the heart tree, her cloak wrapped tight, her eyes turned north. She knew there would always be another winter, another challenge. But she also knew that hope, real, stubborn, wild hope, had taken root in King's Landing. The Wolf Queen had become more than a legend, more than a promise. She was the heart of a living, changing city. A city unafraid, enduring, forever remade by every hand, every voice, every dream. And as dawn broke, Arya Stark, queen and sister and friend, led her people forward, into every new season, into every uncertain day, the story unending, and always, always their own. Okay. The spring, after the long, gentle winter, arrived as a flood, bursting over King's Landing in a riot of green. Vines scaled the new city walls. Flowers spilled from every window box, and the song of birds replaced the cries of old beggars at the gates. Arya greeted it, as she always had, not as something to be tamed, but as a wild joy. She rose before dawn, breathing in dew and the sharp perfume of mint and rose, and by sunrise, she was striding the muddy lanes of Flea Bottom, a plain cloak thrown over her dress, the city sigil on a cheap wooden clasp. She walked alone most mornings, but it was never dangerous. News of the Wolf Queen's strolls spread as fast as the sun, and wherever she turned, doors opened, smiles greeted her, bread and apples pressed into her hand. Children ran at her heels, shouting for stories, and Arya answered them with tales of Nymeria, of the wolf pack by the Trident, of how she'd sailed past the edge of maps and found the world's curve. Mothers nodded approval. Old men touched their brows. Even the city's wildest thieves watched her pass, not with fear, but with the respect paid to the queen who had ended hunger and brought justice to the shadows. The city had changed, but Arya knew better than to trust peace blindly. There were always murmurs, disputes between merchants, the faith's quiet attempts to win hearts, petty thefts, and the first quarrels of the season's new market. But the difference now was in how these troubles were met. The Moot gathered twice each week, every bench full, small folk and lords alike, debating everything from mill wages to the building of a new bridge across the Blackwater. Arya rarely spoke. It was enough that she listened, her steady gaze a promise that every grievance would be heard. In the old days, small folk would have been flogged for questioning attacks. Now, an apprentice cobbler could stand and challenge a gold-cloaked officer's logic, and see the matter settled by common vote. The council chamber was as lively as the Moot. Sansa, clear-eyed and confident, handled alliances and correspondence. Davos had become the city's voice to the world, trading salt and grain for knowledge, foreign scrolls and glass. Gendry's forges worked night and day, now not just for arms, but for plows, locks, hinges, the devices of peace. Alysanne, tireless and wry, brought news from the healers and midwives, her reports full of triumphs and warnings. Samuel's library was the city's new brain. Scribes cataloged everything from ship logs to stories told by children in the alleyways, and every child who could speak could also read. On the first festival day of spring, Arya walked the city walls with Gendry, the wind snapping at their hair. Ships crowded the bay, sails bright as tulips, and on every quay the people set up booths for games and feasts. Gendry pointed to the newly finished granary, its stone walls gleaming, the wolf and city banners flying above. "That's yours, Arya. No one will starve again, not if we can help it." "Ah." Arya rested her hand in his. "It's ours. Yours, mine, theirs. The city built it." He squeezed her fingers, his eyes warm. "Still, none of this would have happened if you kept running." "I'll always be a runner," she said with a crooked smile. "But I run toward things now, not away." At the festival, Arya ate with the dock workers and the smiths, danced in the streets with Sansa and the children, and helped Alysanne judge the best early apples. Later, she stood on the great stage in the moot hall, listening to the poets and acrobats, the storytellers and singers, old ballads and new tales of the Wolf Queen, sometimes exaggerated to the point of hilarity. Arya's laughter carried across the square, and the people joined her, glad to see their queen as one of them, alive with joy. Yet always, there was work. That spring, a dispute between two ancient merchant families threatened to spill into violence. Arya summoned both to her council, bringing not only their patriarchs but their daughters, apprentices, and the workers who loaded their ships. What followed was a debate so fierce and intricate, it lasted the day and half the night. Voices raised, threats made, tears shed. Arya kept order with quiet words, and when at last compromise was reached, she handed down her judgment. Both families would jointly fund the new bridge, their names carved together on its arch, and their poorest apprentices would be granted the first stalls in the next market. It was the sort of settlement that would have been unthinkable in her father's time. When the families agreed, grudging but proud, the whole council applauded. The Moot's greatest challenge that spring came from outside. Ships from Volantis and Tyrosh carrying refugees, women and men fleeing civil strife, crowding the harbor with their battered boats and strange tongues. The old order would have turned them away or pressed them into servitude. Arya ordered the gates opened, but with conditions. Every new arrival must take the oath of peace, and every trade, every craft must be taught and shared. The city grumbled. Some feared hunger, others mistrusted the newcomers. But Arya went to the docks herself, welcomed the leaders of the refugee bands, and made sure everyone was given food, a task, and a place to sleep. It was not always smooth. There were quarrels, a night of rioting that ended with 3 dead and a dozen injured. The next day, Arya sat with both the newcomers and the city's own, hearing every grievance. She sent the troublemakers to work repairing the river walls, and made certain the children of Volantis and the children of King's Landing played together in the market square, learning each other's songs. Over time, mistrust became curiosity, then pride. When the Moot next met, 3 refugees were chosen as delegates by their own people and welcomed with cheers. News from the north was bright. Joan's wedding, celebrated under the new heart tree at Winterfell, was the talk of 2 kingdoms. Arya sent gifts: a sword of Gendry's make, a book of songs by Sansa, a great bolt of city-woven cloth. Bran's letters came on the wings of ravens, each one full of questions about law, trade, and stories from the city's children. Arya read them aloud in the council, laughter and debate following each new riddle. The city was not without pain. A fever in the southern quarter claimed a handful of lives before the healers could stem it. A fire broke out in the stables, destroying a row of houses and scattering families. Arya was there at dawn, sleeves rolled up, handing out bread and blankets, hugging the weeping, promising that no one would be left homeless. The city rallied, and within a week, the houses were rebuilt, stronger than before. Out of every trouble, Arya saw the city's new heart. Not simply survival, but compassion, the fierce resolve to keep hope alive. Gendry's forges became places of invention as much as strength. New kinds of plows, windmills for grinding grain, even a water wheel to turn the mills by the river. Apprentices came from the Summer Islands, from the north, even from the Riverlands, all eager to learn, to add their craft to the city's growing reputation for cleverness and skill. Arya took pride in their achievements, especially when she saw young girls, barefoot, bright-eyed, carrying hammers and plans to the moot. Sansa too had grown into her own power. She convened monthly councils for women only, merchants, midwives, widows, and wives, hearing their needs, making certain their voices shaped the city's future. The faith, seeing the strength of the new sisterhood, grew quieter, focusing instead on charity and healing. Even the most stubborn Septons admitted that the city was safer, happier, and more just than it had been in 100 years. As the river thawed and the new bridge neared completion, Arya spent a night by the water. Alone, she watched the lanterns bob in the dark, remembering all she had lost and all she had gained. In the stillness, she felt the city breathing, living, her city. But not hers alone. It would endure beyond her life, as wild and stubborn as she'd ever been. The day the bridge was finished, the city turned out in celebration. The moot led the first crossing. Children ran ahead tossing petals, and musicians played tunes from every corner of Westeros and Essos. At the center, Arya laid the first stone herself, her hands steady. She looked up and saw the city spread before her, walls shining, banners flying, people shouting her name and each other's, no longer afraid. That night, Arya stood on the bridge with Gendry and Sansa, watching the lights of King's Landing reflect in the Blackwater. "We built this," Sansa whispered. "We all did," Arya replied, her voice quiet but sure. The bells rang out, and the city rejoiced. Arya closed her eyes, breathing in the scent of new grass, river, and hope. She knew there would be new storms, new losses. But she also knew the truth at the heart of every dawn. That peace was work, not a gift. That hope was stubborn, fierce, and always possible. The Wolf Queen's story was far from over. But for this night, she let herself be only Arya, a girl in the heart of her city, loved, trusted, unafraid, and finally, truly at home. Ka. The bridge stood as the first symbol of a city truly reborn. Its graceful arch of pale stone spanning the Blackwater, garlanded with flowers and bright banners, engraved with the sigils of wolf and city, and all the crafts that had built it. It was a promise, carved in stone. No one would be left behind, no part of King's Landing divided from another by hunger, fear, or pride. On festival nights, lanterns were hung from the parapets, their lights reflected in the slow-moving water, while children ran back and forth across the span, their laughter rising to mingle with the bells from the great sept and the calls of watermen below. It was on the bridge, near midnight on the eve of midsummer, that Arya found herself standing alone, wrapped in a plain cloak, her face hidden beneath its hood. She watched the flickering reflections, the last of the revelers drifting home, the city's lights glowing gold across the river. In the distance, she heard the song of a lone flute and the rumble of distant thunder, promise of rain that would soon sweep the dust from the stones and fill the city with the scent of green things. Arya let herself remember days when she'd crossed the river in secret, a lost girl with needle hidden in her sleeve, when hope had been something stolen rather than shared. Now she looked across at the city and felt no ache of loneliness, only a fierce, quiet pride. Every stone, every street, every voice belonged to the city, not to her alone. She thought of her family, scattered and reunited, the ones lost and the ones found. She thought of Gendry, Sansa, Davos, Samwell, Alysanne, and all the others who'd taken up the work beside her. The city's heart beat with many hands, many dreams. The rain began in earnest, but Arya stayed, hood thrown back, letting it soak her hair and cloak. When Gendry found her there, he was half laughing, half scolding, cloak already heavy with water. "If the small folk see their queen catching cold, they'll call for my head." Arya grinned. "I was a wolf long before I was a queen. A little rain never hurt me." He stood beside her, arm around her shoulders, and together they watched the storm break over the rooftops, the river turning black and quick under the bridge. "Remember when we dreamed of leaving all this?" Indri said softly. "Sailing off to the summer isles or beyond. I used to think freedom meant running away," Arya admitted. "Now I know it means standing still and letting things grow around you." They walked back through the quiet streets, lanterns bobbing in the downpour, the city theirs in every sense that mattered. The seasons wheeled on, and with them, the city's life deepened. The new bridge brought wealth and hope to the river's far bank. Merchants from every land set up shop along its approaches, spice sellers from Dorne, glassblowers from Bravos, farmers from the riverlands. The refugees Arya had welcomed found work in the new markets, their songs and food becoming part of the city's tapestry. Children learned words in 3 tongues, and the library's log of names and crafts grew by the week. The moot met beneath the domed roof of the old amphitheater, its benches packed for every session. Here, Arya listened more than she spoke. Some lords still grumbled, but even the most stubborn found themselves outnumbered by the city's new voices: craftswomen and fishermen, bakers and builders, the sharp-tongued girls of Flea Bottom, who were now apprentices in the palace kitchens, or at Samuel's desk. Arya saw herself in all of them, not quite belonging to any single place or story, but shaping something better with each new argument, each hard-won compromise. Sansa grew into her own authority, holding councils with the women of the city, brokering trade with the Reach and the Vale, sending careful, clever letters to every corner of Westeros. Her beauty and composure charmed the old lords, but her steel, the hard core that had survived Littlefinger and Cersei and the Boltons, made her beloved of the small folk. Sansa's Festival of Roses became the city's most anticipated holiday, and the Summer Queen's wreath was always bestowed on a girl from the orphanages or the schools, never on a noble's daughter. Samuel's library was now the beating heart of the city's mind. Scholars copied histories and treatises, but the most popular books were always the new ones: stories told by the small folk, accounts of the moot's debates, poems written by dockworkers and midwives. A new kind of learning spread, not just in ink but in invention. Gendry's forges supplied windmills to the north, glass pumps to Dorne, toys and clocks and clever locks across the city. Arya watched as young women in apprentice black led the city's first fire brigade, their bells ringing in every ward when danger threatened. Not all the news was good. A dry autumn brought a threat of hunger. A band of outlaws struck at travelers north of the city, demanding gold and sowing fear. The faith, always wary of change, whispered of heresy when a moot session ended with the city's first public wedding between 2 women, both healers, both beloved by the people. Arya dealt with each as she always had, with fairness, with open ears, and when needed, with swift action. She rode north at the head of her city guard, sitting down with the outlaws herself, listening to their story. Most were men who'd lost work or land, not hardened criminals, and Arya offered them places in the city's new building crews. "No more ghosts on the road," she promised. "If you break faith again, you answer to me." The threat of hunger was answered with trade: grain from the riverlands, fish from the bay, apples from the Reach. Arya herself supervised the distribution, walking among the bakers and granaries each morning. When the faith tried to stir unrest over the wedding, Arya met with the High Septon in the Sept's own gardens. She knelt beside him, listening as he railed, then offered a blessing herself, in the names of all the gods and for every kind of love. "There is room in this city for all," Arya said. "Or there is room for none." The Septon, cowed by the cheers of his own flock, yielded, and the city's joy rolled on. The following spring, the moot sent Arya on a journey, first to the Reach, where new irrigation systems needed her eye, then north to Winterfell, for the first time since her own wedding. Sansa held court in her stead, the city missing Arya's restless presence, but confident in her return. Winterfell was both changed and unchanged. Its halls full of light, Bran calm and strange on the seat of the north, Jon at his side with wildlings and northern lords. Arya brought stories and songs from the city, returned with tales of ice and wolves, and left with a promise that the north and the city would remain kin, no matter what the future brought. She rode back through the spring, watching the world open like a book. Lands on the hills, fields of wheat and wildflowers, every village no longer wary but welcoming, trusting the peace she'd built. In the city, she was greeted with cheers and gifts. Bread, wine, children's painted stones, tokens not of awe, but of thanks. As the Festival of Lights approached, Arya presided over the moot's greatest debate, whether to open the city's council to the delegates from beyond the narrow sea. It was a hard, heated argument. Some feared too much change, others resented the memory of foreign swords on their shores. Arya listened, her eyes bright, asking question after question, until even the most stubborn voices found themselves thinking not of the past, but of what might come next. When the vote passed, Arya invited the new delegates herself, traders from Bravos, Tyrosh, and the Summer Islands. She met them at the bridge, as rain pattered down, and led them through the city's shining streets, the lights of home reflecting in every puddle. The festival night was a storm of joy. Lanterns floated on the black water, every face alight with hope. In the great square, Arya stood with Gendry and Sansa, their council at their backs, the city stretching away in all directions, a city of old wounds and new dreams. Arya spoke only a few words. We built this together. Hold fast to one another. There will be storms, but you know now how to weather them. And as the city danced, Arya felt the deep, quiet certainty that peace, once found and kept, was a story that would outlive her name, a song carried on by every voice that called this city home. The Wolf Queen smiled into the night, knowing her work was not finished and never would be, but content, at last, to trust the city she had made and the people who would carry its promise forward into every new dawn. Ka. When dawn broke over King's Landing, the whole city shimmered with a silver glow. The Blackwater, still swollen from spring rains, moved slow and serene beneath the bridge's arches, carrying lanterns and petals set adrift during the festival's last wild night. On the palace roof, dew glistened on stone gargoyles and new banners. From the north, a cool wind carried scents of pine and loam. From the south, the sun burned gold on a horizon clean as a sword's edge. Arya Stark woke before the bells, sliding from tangled sheets in Gendry's sleeping arm, dressing herself in simple blue and brown. She moved silent as ever, as she had as a child, her steps muffled on the old runner. She paused in the nursery, watching over a sleeping boy, her son's chest rising and falling in a slow, even rhythm. For a moment she let herself be only mother. A small hand in hers, the ghost of her father's smile on the child's face, before slipping out into the cool corridors, past the kitchens, into the garden where the heart tree flourished. There, Arya found Sansa in a green shawl, a letter from the north in hand, her hair bright in the early sun. News from Winterfell, Sansa said, her voice calm but bright. Jon sends his love. Bran writes that the rivers are free of ice. He says we should come for the next harvest. Arya smiled, letting the thought settle. A journey home, all of them together, the boy running through frosted grass, Gendry trying to keep up. I will. We all will. But not yet. For the city was restless after its revel. Bells tolled for a berth in Flea Bottom, for a ship's safe return, for the death of an old baker whose crusts had fed 3 generations of orphans. Life pressed on, crowding every alley with stories. Arya walked among them, hands in her pockets, hood down, accepting greetings and news. A dockhand told her of a broken crane, a washerwoman worried about the rising river. A baker pressed a hot roll into her palm, saying, "Your boy will need this." At the council table, Sansa led the meeting, her authority by now unchallenged, even by those lords who once muttered behind her back. Samwell read out news from the moot, a new law for apprenticeships, a dispute between city healers and the faith over burial rites, a proposal for a city garden on the burned slope beneath the walls. Davos brought word of ships gathering in the stepstones, perhaps pirates, perhaps the vanguard of a new trading company seeking the city's favor. Gendry, face freshly shaven and hair still damp, announced that the bridge would need new repairs, as the river's spring rush had shifted the east bank. Arya listened, asked questions, then handed the day's decisions to Sansa and Davos. "I'll see to the garden myself," she said, rising before debate could begin. She took Samuel and Gendry, and together they walked the city's outer wall, following the zigzag of new and ancient stones, until they reached the ragged ground that had burned in the last battle. It was here, where ash and wildflowers tangled, that Arya gathered the workers, children, and elders who lived in the nearest alleys. "Not my garden," she told them. "Yours. What do you want to grow?" The answers came in a torrent. Beans, carrots, lettuce, saffron, roses, mint, sweet peas. By noon, a plan was drawn, seeds sorted and soil turned, and Arya spent the afternoon with her hands black with earth, teaching children to plant and elders to sing the planting songs of their villages. Gendry hammered stakes, Samuel set up a rainwater barrel, and by dusk, a small crowd was dancing barefoot, new hope already visible in the rows of bright green. There were trials as always. A fever in the dock quarter spread quickly. Arya sent for Alisan, who worked through the night, moving the sick to the new infirmary, boiling linens, dispensing honey and willow bark. Arya visited each day, speaking to the patients and their kin, arranging food, asking after lost relatives. She did not promise what she could not give, but her presence itself was a promise kept. No one would face fear alone. The faith tested her too. When a priest announced the moot for usurping the god's justice, Arya called an open assembly in the great square. She spoke quietly, simply, of all she'd seen in her journeys. Goodness and cruelty, faith and doubt. The way hope took root in hungry hearts. The gods gave us hands and voices to use, she said. If we do not choose justice, we betray the gifts they gave us. The priest, cowed by the city's applause, retreated, and Arya sent him later a parcel of bread and a poem by Sansa.G. Peace was a daily labor, but not a burden. Arya's love for her city deepened with each trouble faced. Gendry, beside her at council and in the forges, grew into his role as master of arms and father, his rough humor and steady presence a rock for the family and the city alike. Their son, growing fast, learned to walk in the palace gardens, to read by Samwell's knee, to shout, "Justice!" at the end of every moot. Sansa's presence became legend. Her councils of women met in every district. Her festival of lanterns, held for the second time that year, filled the river and sky with floating lights. Under her care, the city's midwives, healers, and merchants became as powerful as its lords. She exchanged letters with queens in Dorne and the Reach, inviting them to send their daughters to the city for learning, trade, and friendship. Arya rode often now into the country beyond the walls, sometimes with Gendry and their son, sometimes alone, her blade at her hip, a pack on her back. She listened to farmers and shepherds, helped rebuild a mill after a flood, settled a quarrel over grazing rights. Wherever she went, the message was the same. The city's laws would be honored, but every village and every hand would be heard. She brought stories back to the moot and to the library, tales of old women who remembered Aegon's conquest, of free folk who brought their customs south, of refugees from across the sea who had found a home in her city. Trade flourished. Braavos sent new ships with goods and teachers. Old Town dispatched scholars and priests to learn the ways of the moot. The Summer Islands sent musicians, and the port rang with their songs at every dusk. Gendry's apprentices grew bold, forging tools and clockworks, making the city's first water-driven mill. Samwell's library expanded, its outer halls now filled with the work of city children, their names carved on new benches. There were setbacks. A late frost ruined the early grape harvest, and Arya spent a week arranging grain shipments and hearing complaints. A merchant tried to bribe a counselor. He was caught, tried openly, and sentenced to a year's service in the city kitchens, his family fed and his dignity preserved. Each problem was a lesson, each lesson another thread in the fabric of peace. As summer crested, the city gathered again, this time for the opening of the new garden. Arya stood with Sansa, Gendry, their son on her hip, and Samwell at her side. The city watched as the children planted the last seeds, laughter and sunlight tumbling together. Arya said only, "Let this be our promise. that every hand can plant, every voice can choose, every life matters. The bells rang, the crowd cheered, and the city bloomed. At dusk, Arya walked the garden paths with Gendry and Sansa, their son chasing fireflies. They watched the lanterns rise over the river, each flame a wish, a memory, a vow. The story did not end. There were quarrels and sorrows to come, storms and seasons yet uncounted. But for that night, Arya Stark, once a shadow, now a mother, queen, sister, friend, knew she had found her place. Not at the city's edge, but at its living, beating heart. The Wolf Queen's reign endured not as a tale of conquest, but as a tapestry of lives entwined, each one shining in the ever-turning light. And as moonlight poured over King's Landing, Arya whispered the names of all she had loved and lost, and those she'd found again, her hope as stubborn as ever, her promise unbroken, her city, her family, her story, and her dream of peace, forever carried forward on the river of days. Oh, K. Summer deepened, and the city grew green and thick with life. The Blackwater glimmered, slow and fat, winding past orchards and meadows that only a decade ago had been the charred remains of war. Children fished from the new bridge in the gold evenings. Bakeries filled the streets with the smell of honey and wheat. On the rooftops, cats sprawled in sunbeams, while sparrows chattered in the gutters. The palace itself, once the hard red heart of all the realm's fear, stood open as never before. Courtyards were hung with linen, musicians played for the small folk, and the echo of laughter filled the colonnades. Arya rose early, as always, slipping away from Gendry and the drowsy warmth of her small son tangled in quilts. She moved with the grace and quiet of long habit, boots soft on cool stone, and went out to the godswood to greet the dawn. The old heart tree was growing fast, its canopy deepening with each passing year, roots like the arms of an ancient woman clutching the earth. Arya touched the rough bark, whispering a single word. "Thank you." She crossed the dew-damp grass to find Sansa seated at a stone bench, eyes bright, already at work with letters from the north and the Vale. Sansa looked up, smiled, and passed her a cup of lemon water. "Jon says Bran's planning a new road to the coast, and the wildlings are helping." Arya grinned, a flash of the wolfish girl she'd been. "Tell him to plant 100 trees beside it. I'll bring our son to see it before winter." There was little time for reminiscing. The day was full. The first mood of summer, then council with Gendry, Davos, Samwell, and the city's new delegates, women from the Healers' Guild, a brave Ossi merchant, a refugee from Lys. Arya listened more than she spoke, her gaze sharp. They debated whether to fund a new grain exchange, how to settle a quarrel between two innkeepers, what to do about a surge of stray dogs. Every decision was weighed in the open. Every voice counted. It was not the way her father had ruled, but Arya had long ago decided that the old ways, of secrets, of command by fear, would never serve the city she loved. After council, Arya walked the riverfront with Gendry. Barges drifted by, loaded with fruit and wool. Masons repaired the embankments, where last year's floods had bitten deep. "Look at them," Gendry said, gesturing to the crowd of workers. Men and women, brown-skinned and pale, old and young, city-born and foreign. "That's why they follow you, Arya. Not because you're queen, but because you're theirs." She bumped his shoulder affectionately. "They're mine because I'm theirs. I learned that from the wolves." "Ben?" They stopped to watch a team of children building tiny boats and racing them on the current, shouts and laughter bouncing off the stone. Gendry grinned. "Our boy's going to want one of those. I'll show him how to build it right." Arya's thoughts turned, as they always did, to the long years when laughter had been rare, when every day was a struggle. She remembered the old, cold world, not just for herself, but for the whole city. Now she walked with open eyes, and if sometimes she found shadows in the corners, she was never afraid. Justice was never perfect, but it was no longer a weapon for the powerful alone. Every baker and whore, every apprentice and lord's son knew it. There were new problems, always. The faith pressed for more say in city matters, citing tradition and the will of the gods. Arya answered their envoys in the open moot, reminding them of the breadlines, the orphanages, and the new hospitals. "If your faith brings comfort, bring it," she said. "But do not mistake comfort for rule." In the end, most priests found their flocks larger and their power smaller, but none dared stir sedition openly. A dry spell in the east fields threatened the year's harvest. Arya called the council and sent for Samuel and the Bravosi merchant. They worked together. Irrigation plans, barge traffic, a scheme to buy surplus grain from Old Town before prices soared. She traveled with Gendry to the farms, listening to every farmer's fears and hopes, eating their bread, sitting by their fires. "No one goes hungry," she promised, and the city kept that promise, even when it meant all went lean for a time. Summer also brought joy. Sansa's Festival of Roses became a week-long affair. Contests of song, food, and dance, games for the children, and a market that drew traders from across the narrow sea. Arya danced with her son in the square, laughing as he stumbled, and drank honey wine with Sansa on the palace roof, while lanterns floated downriver. At the festival's end, Sansa crowned a baker's daughter as Queen of the Roses, and the city sang her praises until dawn. Samuel's library became a place not only for learning, but for gathering. On cool evenings, the moot met in the library's outer courtyards, debates ranging from fishing rights to the writing of a new city anthem. Arya loved these nights, especially when her son curled in her lap, listening to the stories of old mummers and new poets. There, beneath the lanterns, she sometimes felt the deep hush that had haunted her after long travels. The peace of belonging, the peace of being home. But trouble did not vanish. Pirates raided the southern coast, and Arya sent Davos and a fleet of city ships to meet them, striking a bargain that let the pirates resettle as farmers under the city's laws. An outbreak of pox struck one of the poorest districts. Arya and Alysanne visited daily, helping nurse the sick, organizing food and comfort. When the outbreak ended, the survivors and mourners came to the palace gardens and planted white lilies by the heart tree, in thanks and in remembrance. Gendry's forges were busy with inventions, a new kind of plow, a bell that chimed the hours, locks and latches that made city houses safer. He trained apprentices from every district, including children who once would have died in the gutters. His pride in their work was quiet, fierce, and it was not lost on Arya that more than half his apprentices were girls. When the hottest month came, Arya took her family and a company of city children up the Blackwater in boats, sleeping on the riverbank, teaching the little ones to fish and tell stories by the fire. Sansa managed the city, and Arya returned to find everything running as smoothly as ever, better even. Her city could stand without her for a little while, and that was the greatest comfort she had known. The year's end brought the greatest moot yet, with delegates from every major house, from Bravos, and from as far as Old Town and Dorne. The city's anthem was sung in a dozen tongues. Arya sat at the head, her son in her lap, Sansa at her side, Gendry's hand steady on her shoulder. The moot passed a new law, that no one could be denied work or apprenticeship by birth, faith, or sex. Arya sealed it with her name in the cities, and that night, every bell in King's Landing rang until sunrise. After, Arya walked the silent streets, listening to the city breathe. She found herself at the bridge, watching the lanterns drift. The water shone with color, red, gold, blue, green. Each light a wish, a promise, a memory. She thought of all the roads she'd walked, all the battles fought, all the people loved and lost and found. For a long time she stood in the warm wind, letting her heart settle. Gendry found her there, as he always did. He said nothing, only took her hand. She leaned into his shoulder, and together they watched the river carry hope onward, out to the wide world. "We've built something, haven't we?" he murmured. Arya nodded. "And it will outlive us both." She smiled, wolfish, certain. The Wolf Queen was content, for the city's heart was her own, and its future, wild and bright, would be written by every voice, every dreamer, every hand. And as summer's last lanterns flickered down the river, Arya Stark, queen and mother, hero and friend, watched her city live, knowing her journey had led her home, and that the story, her story, their story, would never truly end. The days grew golden and long. the city humming at the height of summer's joy. Each morning began with a low haze on the Blackwater and the distant clang of Gendry's forges, as the apprentices hammered out their morning rhythms. From the east came a wind scented with thyme and wild roses, rustling through the market banners and whistling at the sharp spires of the Red Keep. Arya, always restless, rose before the city and greeted the dawn from her garden balcony, watching the slow flow of life and hope down the river and through the waking streets. Her son, now a sturdy, fast-talking boy, with the keen eyes of a wolf and the ready laugh of a Baratheon, was always at her side in those early hours, carrying a stick, sword, and pestering her with questions. Why do cats climb on the roofs? Why do boats float but rocks sink? Why don't you wear your crown when you buy bread? Arya answered every question as best she could, letting curiosity be his teacher. Sometimes, when the boy's questions grew wild, or the city's needs called her away, Arya would slip out alone into the heart of the city, blending with the bakers, the carpenters, the merchants, and the beggars. Even after all the years of peace, it was the freedom to vanish into her own world that she prized most. The council chamber was brighter now, the old dark paneling replaced by tall windows that poured in sunlight and fresh air. Sansa presided over meetings with her customary composure and quiet steel. On this morning, she wore a pale dress embroidered with the city's sigil and read from a pile of petitions. Requests for market stalls, appeals over property lines, invitations from the Reach and the North. Davos, older and more cheerful than ever, brought news from the harbor. A Tyroshi ship loaded with citrus and spice, new trade contracts signed with Bravos, the first shipment of Summer Island timber for the growing navy. Gendry, sunburnt and still dusted with coal, detailed the progress on a new bell tower, an invention that would let the city tell the hour by music, not just the sun. Samwell was, as always, delighted to announce a new history project. The Children of King's Landing, writing down the tales of their elders for the library's growing shelves. Alisan, healer and midwife, brought word of a sickness caught and stopped in Flea Bottom. Her network of midwives and apprentices had handled it swiftly, and she asked the moot for thanks, not for herself, but for the young girls who had risked their own health to nurse the sick. After the council, Arya spent the day moving from ward to ward. She visited the school, where her son and the city's children learned their letters, watched them act out plays about the history of Westeros, and sat through a hilarious trial in which her son played the judge, his friends debating whether a cat had truly stolen the fish from the market. Later, she watched apprentices at Gendry's forges, their pride obvious as they demonstrated new hinges, gears, and locks, some even trying their hands at miniature swords for the Moots Festival games. On the riverbank, she listened to the stories of an old sailor who had once fought in the war and now spent his days teaching children to tie knots and mend nets. "I never thought I'd live to see a queen walk among us," he told Arya, "and never thought I'd see a city that belonged to everyone." She thanked him, kneeling to show the children how to tie the cleverest knot she knew. The moot was the heart of every week. On the festival's eve, Arya watched as people from every walk of life filled the amphitheater. A poet read a new song about the bridge. Sansa led a debate on new apprenticeship laws, and Gendry presented his plan for water wheels along the city's stream. Refugees from Lys, now settled in the city's south quarter, brought sweet cakes and told stories in their own tongue, Samwell promising to see their words copied in the next book of city tales. Arya spoke last, only to remind the moot. Every voice is needed, every stone and every hand. We've made something here the world has never seen. Guard it. Share it. Carry it onward. Then, summer also brought new trials. The Iron Islands sent word of a failed harvest. Arya arranged for surplus grain to be shipped, asking only that Ironborn children be sent to the city's schools in return. In Dorne, border skirmishes threatened the peace. Arya sent envoys, letters, and finally herself, riding south in plain clothes, learning the truth of the conflict firsthand, then returning with a treaty in hand. No blood spilled, only land and water rights, divided by the new laws of compromise. There were nights when Arya found herself awake and wandering. She'd climb the bell tower, look out over the city's lamplit streets, and listen to the new bells sing the hour. Sometimes a slow hymn, sometimes a cheerful song. She thought of all the years she'd run and hidden, all the names she'd whispered in darkness. Now, the city's song was her own. Peace, work, laughter, and the promise that no one was forgotten. As the festival approached, Arya and Gendry worked side by side to ready the city. The bridge was hung with ribbons and lanterns, each street swept clean, each market stall painted and polished. The moot welcomed visitors from Old Town, Bravos, and beyond. On the night of the opening feast, Arya's son led a procession of children down the bridge, carrying a banner stitched with the symbols of every ward and every craft. The city watched in joy as music rose and bread was broken, and strangers toasted each other's health. That night, Arya walked alone along the river, the bells singing behind her, the city glowing gold in the dark. She stopped where the water lapped at the old stones and knelt, whispering thanks to all the gods she'd known, old and new, nearer and far. She remembered her father, her mother, Robb and Bran, all the ghosts who had shaped her, and let her heart be full of gratitude, not grief. Gendry found her there as always. "You did it," he said, wrapping his arms around her, voice thick with pride and love. "We did it. We're not done," Arya answered, a smile in her voice. "We'll never be done, but for tonight, let's just watch them dance." The city, their city, spun on, no longer a thing of shadows and blood, but of courage, of laughter, of hands joined together. The story was unfinished, and would always be. But Arya Stark stood at the heart of it, a wolf in the light, at home at last. And as the bells rang midnight and lanterns drifted down the Blackwater, King's Landing glowed with the fierce, stubborn hope she had kindled, a hope that would carry the city and its queen through every season yet to come. Autumn's first breath swept through King's Landing, carrying with it the scent of ripe apples, smoke, and rain. The river was low, its banks tangled with wild asters and the sprawl of late summer gardens. By day, sunlight slanted gold on the old red walls. By night, the air grew cool enough for shawls and the first fires in kitchen hearths. It was the city's favorite season, harvest and hearth, a time of stories and gathering, the peace of a land that remembered too well what war and hunger had cost. Arya walked the city in the hour before dawn, boots damp with dew, her son's small hand tucked in hers. Boy asked after everything. Why do the leaves turn? Why do we bury seeds? Where does the moon go in the morning? Arya answered honestly, and when she did not know, she let the question stand, promising that they would learn together. She stopped in the market to buy him an apple, watching the city wake, bakers' ovens smoking, fisherfolk haggling over the night's catch, bells clanging from the new tower as the city's anthem rolled across the rooftops. The council chamber was lively, the tall windows cracked to let in the chill and the sound of distant singing. Sansa had gathered the city's leaders for a day of harvest planning, grain and apples, pears and late tomatoes, the last figs from the palace trees. Davos shared news from the docks, new ships from the summer islands, the first olives from Dorne. Samwell read a list of students who'd written the city's best tales. Alysanne described a successful campaign against summer fever, thanks to the young apprentices trained at her side. Gendry, shoulders dusted with sawdust, brought sketches for new water wheels and stoves. The city was learning, building, healing. After the council, Arya slipped away to the new garden on the burned slope, where volunteers, elders, children, refugees, were harvesting beans and digging the last potatoes. She worked beside them, her hands in the dirt, her laugh ringing out when a girl uncovered a fat mole or a perfect carrot. The garden, like the city itself, was wild and ordered both, its lines shaped by argument and compromise, its heart beating in every hand that turned the soil. Trouble was never absent, only changed. That season the faith called for a new septi to be raised in the river district. Some feared it would bring division, others saw it as a chance for the city's many faiths to work together. Arya called a moot, inviting every priest, healer, and teacher to speak. The debate ran long, but in the end, the city voted not for one temple, but for a common house, a place where any god could be honored and every voice could be heard. Arya herself laid the first stone, her son handing her a trowel, and the crowd cheered as the walls rose, a promise of unity, not uniformity. There was also a dispute with the Iron Islands. Their ships, having survived famine thanks to Arya's grain, now wanted to trade in the city's harbor at lower rates. The moot debated. Arya rode down to the docks and spoke with the Ironborn captains herself, striking a bargain. Fair trade, but only if Ironborn apprentices worked in the city's shipyards and attended the moot. No one gets a voice who won't listen to others, Arya said, and the deal was sealed with bread and salt. Festival season came. The city's lanes were hung with banners and lanterns, the bridges swept clean, the market squares thick with song and smells of roasting chestnuts and honeyed pears. Arya led the children's parade through the city, her son riding on her shoulders, a crown of late roses in his hair. Sansa organized the contests, archery and riddles, poetry and pie baking, the last of which Arya judged alongside Gendry, feigning seriousness until the laughter was too much. At night, there were dances in every square. The small folk told stories of the Wolf Queen's journey, her travels and triumphs, her kindnesses and her blade. Arya, in a simple dress, moved among them, accepting thanks but always reminding them, "It's your city. I just help it listen to itself." As the leaves turned red and gold, Arya found herself summoned to the outer districts, where a fire had swept through 3 streets. She arrived before dawn, cloak flapping in the wind, and began at once, organizing bucket lines, calming frightened children, helping Gendry and his apprentices shore up half-collapsed walls. When the flames were gone, Arya called for the moot to meet on the site. They planned not just to rebuild, but to do so together, the people of every ward sending wood, stone, food, and skilled hands. When the last house was finished weeks later, Arya held a feast beneath the stars, bread and stew shared by every neighbor. The city's library marked its 10th year. Samuel led a celebration where children read their stories, apprentices displayed drawings and inventions, and the elders told tales of old King's Landing, of hunger and fear, of how far they'd come. A girl from Dorne sang a ballad about a city that had learned to listen, her voice sweet and fierce. A boy from the north recited a story of wolves and men, his words strong and clear. Arya watched, heart full, as her son joined the children in a play about Nymeria and the 1,000 ships. Sansa's Lantern Festival came at the end of the harvest, the river glittering with drifting lights. The city's wishes were spoken aloud: peace, health, laughter, justice, and Arya, standing with her family at the bridge, sent her own lantern out onto the black water. In that moment she felt the city's hope surround her, not a fragile thing but a living force, built of every voice, every kindness, every act of courage or grace. As the nights cooled, Arya and Gendry would often sit on the palace roof, after their son was asleep, wrapped in a blanket, watching the city glow. They spoke quietly of the future. How to keep the peace. How to teach their child to lead without fear. How to help the city hold on to the lessons of war and want. Gendry, ever practical, wanted to plant more orchards, build new wells. Arya wanted to see the moot's children take charge, to open the library's doors to every new voice, to travel with her son when the time was right and show him the world beyond the walls. The city was not without sorrow. An old healer died, and Arya attended her funeral, standing among the mourners as Sansa read a poem. A boy was lost to fever, and the city grieved together, planting a tree in his memory. Each loss was met not with despair, but with the quiet resolve to hold tighter to hope, to care for one another better and more fiercely. Autumn ripened into a mild winter, and the city prepared again. Granaries full, wood stacked, bells polished, lanterns ready. The last council of the year was held in the garden. Arya's son perched on her lap as she listened to the city's plans for the coming year. More gardens, new schools, a moot that would include the voices of travelers and strangers. When the first snow fell, soft as lace on the heart tree's boughs, Arya walked the city once more, her son on her shoulders, Gendry and Sansa at her side. The streets were quiet, the air bright, the river winding on toward the sea. She felt the city's pulse in every step. Strong, true, unbroken. And as Arya looked out over the rooftops, wolf, queen, mother, friend, she understood at last what she had built. Not a monument, not a kingdom of stone, but a city of stories, carried in every heart. The city song was one of hope and memory, of promise kept and promise yet to come, a song that would outlast them all, fierce as autumn, bright as the coming spring. Ka. The year's last days settled on King's Landing with a hush, the city softened by frost and the sweet bracing air of winter's true beginning. Smoke curled steadily from every chimney. Snow clung to the gardens and courtyards, dusted the red keep's high towers, and transformed the bridge into a silvery arch above the glassy black river. The days were short, but warm in spirit. Each afternoon, as dusk fell early, lanterns winked on across the city, and the bells sang the new anthem, echoing over rooftops and down every winding lane. Arya began her mornings as she always had, rising before light, boots laced and blade at her hip, though the need for weapons had faded into tradition. She walked the city with her son, who was old enough now to walk beside her, sturdy in his wool cloak and eager for every errand. Together they broke the crust of ice at the garden cistern, fed scraps to the palace cats, and scattered crumbs for birds that gathered by the heart tree's roots. Arya let the cold redden her cheeks and made a game of who could spot the first hint of green beneath the snow. When they reached the kitchens, steam and the smell of sweet bread rushed out to meet them. Arya's son was greeted by name, offered a cup of hot cider, and Arya herself was handed a bundle of crusts for their walk. "You're not so much a queen as a neighbor," a cook teased, and Arya grinned, loving the truth of it. In the council chamber, the winter sun angled through tall, clear windows. Sansa presided with her effortless calm, reading the last of the harvest tallies and the first reports of travel slowed by snow. Gendry, hands raw from cold iron and rough gloves, spoke of the city's wells, how one had frozen, how others ran clear thanks to new pipes, devised by his youngest apprentices. Davos delivered news from the harbor. The last grain ships had arrived, their holds full, and the city was flush against the worst cold. Samwell's joy was clear in his voice as he announced that a Braavosi scholar had sent a chest of books for the library. Histories, tales, and children's stories, with a note of friendship and gratitude. Alysanne reported a mild winter start, only a few fevers, and many babies born strong and well. "It's a lucky year," she said, her face bright. "The mothers say the city's peace has made for strong hearts." After council, Arya lingered with Sansa in the palace garden, watching the sun's slow climb. "Did you ever think we'd see this?" Arya asked, tracing a pattern in the snow. "Not once," Sansa admitted, her voice soft and sure. "But I never stopped wanting it." "We'll keep it," Arya promised, "so long as the city remembers what it cost." That afternoon, Arya brought her son to Samwell's library for the first of the year's winter lessons, a gathering of children from every district, sitting cross-legged by the fire as Samwell and a handful of older students read aloud. Arya watched the faces, brown and fair, scarred and freckled, the children of gold cloaks and merchants and refugees all alike in their hunger for story. Her son listened wide-eyed to the tale of brave Nymeria, and afterwards Arya taught the whole group how to knot a cord and make a sling from a strip of cloth. Outside, the city's pace slowed with the cold. The markets bustled in the pale noon, but by twilight, families gathered early around hearths. Each neighborhood cared for its own, soup kitchens run by old rivals, firewood stacked by children and elders alike, songs and stories traded for the price of a smile. On the first night the river froze, Arya and Gendry joined the crowds at the bridge, helping children test the ice, catching them when they slipped, and roasting chestnuts over a brazier built by Gendry's apprentices. The city's festival of lights fell on the longest night. Sansa led the moot's procession with a lantern in hand, Arya and her family at her side, each counselor and guildmaster following with their own. They wound through the city, lanterns bobbing, their path joined by hundreds more. At the bridge, They set their lights afloat on the river, each flame a wish. Health, laughter, peace, hope. Arya's son, cheeks red with cold, whispered his wish to her. A sister, a puppy, and more stories in the new year. Gendry's eyes met Arya's over the boy's head, and their laughter joined the crowds as lanterns drifted out, painting the ice in gold and crimson. Winter's peace was not without its work. On the city's edge, a shelter burned in a freak chimney fire. Arya was there before dawn, organizing help, standing with the families who'd lost their beds. "No one goes cold," she promised. The city rallied. Beds, food, clothes appeared as if by magic, and the shelter was rebuilt within a week, warmer and safer than before. When a thief was caught taking bread, Arya went to the market herself, hearing his story and arranging for him to work at the bakery. Justice feeds as well as punishes, she reminded the moot. And the law stood. Gendry's forges never rested. He taught the older children how to mend iron and shape tin, to fix hinges and cobble shoes. Arya's son was at his elbow, learning the hammer's rhythm, asking endless questions. When a storm toppled a market stall, Gendry's apprentices rebuilt it, and the markwoman sent a pie to the palace in thanks. Sansa managed the city's letters, thanks to Old Town for medicines, to Bravos for books, to Dorne for oranges that arrived, miraculously, on a sleigh built for the winter road. Samwell and Alysanne published a small book for the library, The Winter of Hope, a collection of the city's tales and drawings, written and illustrated by the children. It was copied and carried to every school, every shelter, every home. Arya, more than ever, felt her city's heartbeat in these quiet, cold days. She still walked the walls at night, sometimes alone, sometimes with Gendry, sometimes with Sansa or Davos, the air crisp and sharp, the city below glowing with firelight and faith. She met every challenge with the same tools: a listening ear, a steady hand, a promise made and kept. In this, she saw the true measure of peace, not the absence of trouble, but the presence of care, of courage, of a hope shared by all. The winter passed in festivals and feasts, in counsel and laughter, in loss and renewal. As the year turned, Arya watched her son, bolder, wiser, more curious each day, help light the first lantern of the new season. She felt the city move beneath her feet, strong, whole, unafraid. And as spring's first green showed beneath the last snow, Arya knew that the story she'd helped write would endure, not just in laws or legends, but in the lives of her people, in every promise made, every hand joined, every lantern sent out on the river to mark the light's return. King's Landing stood, the Wolf Queen city, woven from hardship and hope, a place where every season brought new life, and the dream of peace was always being made, together, in the turning of the year. Oh, okay. Spring broke suddenly, a shimmer of green racing up from the riverbanks, a quickening in the air that seemed to lift the entire city from its winter hush. On the first morning the ice was gone from the Blackwater. Children shouted from the bridge, pelting the river with the last fragile snowballs. The bakeries filled with the scent of honey and new butter. Every window box, every patch of earth in the palace gardens, burst with crocus and violet. Arya, rising before sunrise, slipped into her boots and cloak, her son already waiting at the door. He held a basket, eager to search for the first wild greens. Together, they hurried down the old steps and out into the waking world. On that day, the city felt entirely hers, hers not by blood or battle, but by effort, by belonging, by every promise made and kept through cold and hunger and fear. She walked with her son through Flea Bottom and the market lanes, greeted by name by old fishwives, bakers, peddlers, the smith's apprentices just finishing their night shifts. Everyone had a story to share. The city's last fever had broken. The council had approved funds for a new library annex. A clever midwife had delivered triplets by moonlight. Arya let the morning take her wherever it would. She stooped to talk with two children mending a broken cart, helped an old man to his bench in the sun, listened to the dockmaster's worries about the river's spring surge. Her son wandered ahead, fearless, friends in every quarter, She watched him with the same mix of pride and vigilance her own mother must have felt. When they reached the new city garden on the old burned slope, it was alive with color. Sansa was there already, robes muddy, laughing with the gardeners as they argued over where to plant beans and where to leave room for the children's sunflower patch. Sansa had become a force in her own right, no longer just Arya's clever sister, but the voice of women, healers, and merchants across the city. The moot was hers as much as Arya's now. When Arya joined the morning meeting, she took her place in a circle that had grown to include every kind of voice. That day's council was spent beneath the budding heart tree, the first green flickers just visible on its white branches. Samwell read the spring's first petition, a call for more apprenticeships at the city's forges. Gendry, broad-shouldered and quick to smile, promised that every child who wanted to learn would find a place at his workbenches. Davos outlined a plan to clear silt from the harbor and build a new dock for Braavosi traders. Alysanne's apprentice midwives had just trained their 100th student, and there was talk of sending a small party north to Winterfell to share their knowledge. Arya listened to it all, the triumphs and quarrels, the half-remembered stories and the sharp new hopes. She felt the city's future opening like a road before her. Bright and wild and uncertain, the river's banks filled with life. Market girls wove flower crowns, boys ran races, even the old street dogs slept in patches of sun. Arya took her son's hand and walked the new bridge at midday, watching boats drift beneath, their sails bright with paint and stitched banners. She saw a Braavosi ship and waved to the captain, who shouted his greetings in 3 languages. It was a new world, open, unexpected, and unafraid. That afternoon, Arya joined Gendry at the forges, her son perched on a worktable watching the dance of sparks. Gendry and his apprentices showed off their newest invention, a water lift for the gardens, built from gears and leather and old ship's rope. "The city can water itself," one of the girls boasted, "and next, we'll light the streets with sun globes." Arya grinned, heart light. She saw herself in these children, saw the city's future in every calloused hand and clever eye. "Show me how it works," she said, and let them lead her through the garden as the water lift whirred to life, drawing up cool water in silver buckets to spill among the beans and peas. Evening brought the first mood of spring. The amphitheater was crowded. Merchants, lords, former refugees, and children all pressed together. Sansa introduced a new rule. Any child old enough to speak could cast a vote on festival days. The debate was lively, laughter and argument mixing as the city worked out how to set the year's markets, which roads to repair, how to fund another orphanage. Arya watched as her son and a cluster of friends debated fiercely with 2 old stonemasons. There would be a sunflower race and a pie contest, and the moot would judge the best. After, the city feasted in the open squares. Lanterns hung from every tree, music rang through the streets, and Arya danced with her son, Gendry and Sansa, beneath the moon. There were troubles, as always. A tavern brawl, a sick child in the North Ward, a lord from the west pressing for more land. But each problem found its way to the council, to the moot, to Arya's hands and ears. There was no magic, no single answer, only the steady work of listening, deciding, and trusting the city to heal itself. News from the wider world was mostly good. The Iron Islands sent news of their own moot, held on the city's model. Dorne requested more healers and sent gifts of oranges, gold, and sand silk. A party arrived from Winterfell, bringing a basket of northern apples, a letter from Jon, and the laughter of free folk children. One night, Arya found herself alone by the river, the city sleeping behind her, the water a ribbon of silver beneath the stars. She felt the old pull of the road, the itch for wild places, for the unknown. But she also felt the weight of the city's trust, the joy of her son's hand in hers, the comfort of Gendry's arm, and Sansa's wisdom. She let the longing settle, knowing it would never vanish, but also knowing she would never again be alone. Spring rushed on, each day brighter and fuller. The market swelled with food and song. The library opened a new hall for storytellers, and Arya's city celebrated itself. A living, growing, imperfect thing, remade with every new voice. As the sun set on a day of work and play, Arya climbed the bell tower with her son, watching the city blaze with lanterns and the bridge glow white in the dusk. "Will it always be like this?" he whispered. Arya thought of war and hunger, of hope and labor, of love and loss. "Nothing ever stays the same," she said. "But as long as we choose hope, as long as we work together, the city will always be ours." The bells tolled, the night deepened, and Arya Stark, Wolf Queen, watched the city live on, wild and bright, unfinished and unafraid, its promise carried forward by every hand, every heart, every dream.